21. Transformation Magic. Look closely. These are the ancient runes of the Restoration Charm and the Werewolf Restoration Spell. Professor Quirrell flicked his wand, and two sets of intricate runes flared into the air like burning script. A second tap of his wand brought three darker, far more ominous runes to life, the ancient forms of the Unforgivable Curses. Runes drawn from the depths of the soul, his voice took on an odd cadence, as if he were chanting, were said to be symbols, ancient wizards captured at the edge of dreams, on the threshold of death. Only when you see these primordial runes can you feel the vast gulf between them. A mere shift of a few syllables twists the path of magic, restructures the very fabric of the soul, and in the end, births an entirely different spell. Quirrell's tone carried a sick exhilaration. Those ancient wizards must have been ecstatic. A single mistake in casting let them brush against the soul's most secret, most fragile core. One incantation, and the soul shatters like glass and disperses. That is the icy essence of the killing curse. At the name of the killing curse, Quirrell's expression slipped into something like a memory. For a heartbeat, his gaze unfocused. Then he went on. The Cruciatus Curse and Imperius are of the same stock. What followed was a display of scholarship that took Roger's breath away. Lord Vol, Professor Quirrell, dissected the Restoration Charm and the Werewolf Restoration Spell side by side with the three Unforgivable Curses with the precision of an artificer dismantling a delicate mechanism. Variant wordings, subtle casting keys, derivative branch spells, even rare countercurses were all laid bare beneath his wand. Most crucially, he parsed with uncanny clarity the startling common ancestry and divergent evolutionary paths of the white magic restoratives and the three black magic curses. They were like travelers who had taken opposite forks in the labyrinth of the soul. Roger listened, rapt, his quill scratching frantic shorthand across the parchment, while in his head the biocomputer spun at full tilt, ravenous for the 5 ancient runic versions of the spells. He was so absorbed he did not notice Quirrell's eyes glittering strangely, fixed on him. Professor Quirrell, was a master of soul manipulation, delivering a lecture that cut to the marrow. The logic was so airtight it stole the breath away. When the lecture ended, Quirrell flicked his wand with the same elegant precision, and a signed slip of parchment floated to Roger, a pass to the restricted section. If you wish to touch the wellspring of magic more deeply, his low voice had a beguiling hiss like a serpent to the ear. I suggest you peruse the texts on ancient runes, letters born of the soul, holding true wisdom. They lie deep within the restricted section. Take this. Beneath his turban, the corner of Quirrell's mouth curved in a cold, unreadable smile. Roger left the office with his heart still racing. The hall was immense. Not only had he gained access to the restricted section, but under the personal tutelage of Lord Voldemort, Master of Souls, he had effectively mastered the Restoration Charm, the Werewolf Restoration Spell, the Killing Curse, Avada Kedavra, and the Cruciatus Curse, Crucio. Even his previously learned Imperius now felt polished, its depths clearer. And above all, he had the soul lore itself, the mapping of runic syllables to nodes within the soul and their operating laws. To Voldemort, such knowledge might have been trivial. To Roger, it was the missing puzzle piece. His transformation magic theory was now complete. All that remained was to find a suitable magical creature, scan its precise magical patterns with the biocomputer in his head, and launch the first true transformation experiment. Thinking of the spell he'd devised, Roger felt a surge of pride. Visions flashed through his mind, himself as a towering giant, a ferocious werewolf, a fire-breathing dragon, even a savage basilisk or a dementor. Possessing those creatures' innate powers while retaining his own spellcraft, he could walk sideways through the wizarding world, and perhaps even Voldemort would have to speak politely to him. The leap in raw power was only the start. Because his transformations would operate at the biological and even soul level, every hair he shed as a unicorn would be genuine unicorn hair. How many galleons would that fetch? And once he became a magical creature and learned its innate abilities, could those gifts be decoded and refined into spells usable by wizards? Wizards' studies of magical beasts had always skimmed the surface. By personally becoming them, his anatomical insight would dwarf that of any magizoologist. Undoubtedly, It would be a magic that defined an era. He walked quickly, almost humming, the corners of his mouth refusing to stay down. Then, in an unguarded moment, as he glanced back, a chill seized him. Professor Quirrell stood motionless at a high tower window, his turbaned silhouette framed against the dark glass. Those eyes, deep in shadow, seemed to pierce the night, cold and fixed on Roger's retreating back. A spike of dread went through him. Gooseflesh rose and cold sweat dampened his robes. He was not so naive as to think Voldemort had taught him out of fondness for talent. Recruitment? The thought surfaced, and he snorted in scorn. Who did he think he was? Some first-year nobody worthy of the Dark Lord's personal courtship. Look at the fates of those predecessors. Quirrell, who came willingly and was discarded like trash in front of Harry. Barty Crouch Jr., loyal to the bitter end and cast aside when no longer useful. To Voldemort, being noticed probably meant you were already honored. The proper response was to grovel and offer up your soul. The picture made him feel sick. If he refused, if he failed to kneel, would that not be a slap in the face to the most terrifying, vindictive madman in the wizarding world? Sk, Roger hissed under his breath. His current strength was far too meager to risk earning Voldemort's ire. Why had he ever provoked the Dark Lord? Worse, the Voldemort he had just seen was in far better health than the version from the original story. No doubt the unicorn blood and the immortality potion provided by that old wizard had something to do with it. Even if Roger had not drunk the blood himself, he had been the one to collect it. Perhaps the curse that came with unicorn blood had missed him, but his luck had certainly not. Seek Dumbledore? The notion flared up and was instantly crushed. Run and confess? Wait for legitimacy to peel his mind like an onion? The methods of the White Lord might well prove no gentler than the Dark Lord's. Roger continued down the midnight corridor, weighed down by worry, when hushed voices drifted down from the floor above. 22. Cerberus, Malfoy tricked you, Hermione said, breathless and absolutely certain. Don't you see? He never meant to meet you. He's already told Filch. She's right. We have to get back to the tower, Ron urged, panic tightening his voice. Fast as we can. Harry knew Hermione was right, but pride kept him from saying so. Move. Out of here first. Just then, Wahaha! Peeves shrieked, his cackle cracking through the corridor like thunder. The poltergeist swooped above them, delighted. Students out of bed, sneaking through the charms corridor. Peeves sees all. Run, Harry hissed. They bolted, only to hear Filch's scraping footsteps ahead and Madame Norris's furious yowls right behind. They were seconds from being trapped. Peeves cackled even, Over here, Mr. Filch. Naughty little nightwalkers. I'll draw him off. Roger Lewis darted out from behind a suit of armor, voice low and urgent. He'd warmed to Harry over the past hours. The more he thought, the more convinced he became that only Harry Potter could stand against Voldemort. From that angle, the boy really did look like the one who might save them all. Roger wanted to blurt out everything he knew about the Philosopher's Stone, send Harry racing to claim it, lure Voldemort into the open, anything to shift danger away from himself. Roger? Harry called, relieved, and pointed toward a pitch-black side passage. This way. Move. The four of them vanished like startled rabbits. Roger sucked in a breath and slammed his wand up. Lumos. Blinding light burst forth, spilling down the corridor. His shadow loomed across the stone like a monster. There! Get him! Filch roared, boots pounding toward the glare. Success. Roger killed the light and slipped back. Harry's group was gone. Only Filch's distant curses and Peeves' delighted whoops echoed. Where'd they go? Tell me, Peeves. You didn't say please. Fine. Please tell me. But I don't know anything. Tee-hee! Filch's shouts faded. From nearby, a hushed voice called, Over here. Roger saw a heavy oak door standing ajar, yellow light pouring out. Harry waved frantically. Roger darted inside. The room hit him like a physical blow. Neville stood frozen behind the door, face chalk white, lips trembling. Harry, Ron, and Hermione were backing away as if from an illness. In the center of the chamber loomed a beast so vast it filled floor to ceiling, its animal musk hot and rank in the air. Worse, it had 3 grotesque heads. 6 cloudy yellow eyes swept the dark and fixed on the intruders with ravenous hunger. 3 mouths bristled with yellow fangs, ropes of stinking saliva dripping onto the flagstones while a rolling, thunderous growl rolled through the room. Grr! Merlins! Holy socks! Ron croaked. Harry went rigid. What is that thing? Cerberus, Roger breathed, a strange thrill in his voice. Even with whatever lullaby weakness it might have, its raw power was terrifying, Class 5 Extra the Ministry's deadliest rating. In canon, even Professor Snape had once fled wounded. Quirrell had spent months poring over workarounds rather than fighting it outright. Roger felt a fleeting, almost childish itch to become it, to feel that power in his own limbs. But why is something that horrible in the school? Hermione whispered, clutching Ron's sleeve. Neville whimpered, Please, let's run." "Back out quietly," Roger murmured, eyes fixed on the chain as thick as a child's arm that bound the creature. He wanted more than anything to study it. Such a specimen was incredibly rare. Specimen? Ron's face twitched. The slobbering, sulfur-smelling creature was no one's pet. Harry swallowed hard, voice steady. "No, Roger, we all back out slow, then slam the door. Simple, right?" They edged backward, as if on thin ice. The moment they cleared the threshold, Harry heaved and the oak door crashed shut. Everyone except Roger sagged against the cold wood, gasping as if dragged from drowning. "What are they thinking, keeping that here?" Ron panted. "Does Hogwarts teach taming lessons now?" "I wouldn't take that class if you paid me," Neville managed. Hermione's eyes were bright. "Look, its paws. It's standing on a trapdoor. It's guarding something." Roger knew perfectly well what. The Philosopher's Stone. He kept his mouth shut, though. His mind was still replaying the complex, subtle magical patterns he'd scanned in the beast's soul. The others were too shaken to linger. They bolted for the dormitory without another word. Roger lingered, heart still thudding with adrenaline and something darker, curiosity edged with awe. Under cover of night and Peeves' distant shrieks, he slipped back to the doorway, finished the meticulous scan he hadn't been able to complete earlier, and then melted into the shadows. 23. Transformation Preparation. At breakfast the next morning, Roger, like Harry and Ron, had two livid black eyes, as if he'd been smoked over a fire. While Harry, his voice low, told Ron how he'd gone with Hagrid to Gringotts before term began to collect a strange parcel, 6 long-eared owls swooped into the great hall and dropped precisely in front of him. Amid the little wizard's envious gasps, Professor McGonagall's gift was unveiled, a brand new Nimbus 2000. Even more stunning, Harry had been invited to join the Gryffindor Quidditch team. Roger showed no sign of interest. He never even noticed when Wayne beside him nearly knocked over his pumpkin juice in excitement. Every thread of his attention was still tangled in the vast, star chart-like magical lattice of the Cerberus he'd seen the night before. Oceans of data were still being parsed at frantic speed by his biocomputer. He had to make sure every step of his first transformation experiment was flawless. The morning class was herbology with Professor Sprout, Hufflepuff's head, shared this week with Slytherin. Today they were harvesting wolfsbane. Roger and Wayne were paired at a single pot. The greenhouse smelled of damp earth and leaves. Many students treated the lesson like a joke and kept laughing and fooling around. Professor Sprout, wearing thick gloves and her protective hat, explained patiently, "Aconite, children, also called monkshood or wolfsbane, is a valuable magical plant. It used to grow everywhere. Now you only find it in certain wild places." She lifted a specimen carefully. "It's the key ingredient for the wolfsbane potion. Flowers, roots, and leaves are all useful," her tone suddenly sharpened. "But its leaves contain a deadly poison." Her gaze swept the greenhouse. "Careless handling and the magical toxin in the leaves can leave you deaf. To muggles, the damage is permanent and incurable." Her warning doused the laughter like cold water. Students swallowed and moved much more carefully. Sprout's expression relaxed a little. "Even stranger," she added, "you don't have to eat aconite. The sap can soak in through the skin. So gloves, never ever take them off." The caution took hold. Some students hesitated, afraid to touch the plants. Others checked their gloves and cuffs repeatedly before beginning. Roger and Wayne followed the steps, snipped the leaves, cut the stems, lift the root out with care. All the while, Roger kept his biocomputer vision running, watching the plant's magical flow. It was far simpler than anything he'd expected. Scattered, faint patterns, like pale scratches on white paper, never forming a coherent shape. A thought flashed through him. So aconite itself has no soul. When classes ended, Roger took Professor Quirrell's special permit and went back to the library. He had prepared thoroughly, even rereading the old wizard's notes, especially those on werewolves. The old wizard hadn't studied them deeply. His verdict had been, "I tried transforming into magical creatures long ago. In my view, it's futile." That only made Roger more determined. To guarantee his transformation spell would be flawless, he needed data the regular shelves didn't hold. The restricted section's riches were exactly what he hungered for. Madame Pince took the slip, pushed her needle-sharp spectacles up, and examined the note with a face that mixed shock and outrage. Quirrell giving a first-year access to the restricted section? Only after checking the professor's signature and seal did she, with obvious reluctance, allow him in, insisting on accompanying him. To Roger, the restricted section was an unfathomable vault. Here were grimoires lost to the wider world and a wealth of forbidden lore, books on spirit summoning, manuals detailing unforgivable curses, and even entries about horcruxes. Top journals lined the shelves: Spell Innovation, Master Potioneer, Today's Transfiguration, alongside priceless research notes and theses by past professors, including Dumbledore's celebrated paper on the 12 uses of dragon blood. The knowledge here was second only to the Ministry archives. It was kept from students for good reason. Books could be dangerous. Their authors' malice, curses, or concealed requirements could ruin the unsuspecting. Advanced texts often needed strong magic or a specific key to unlock them. Roger knew that. He'd bought a notebook on the Imperius Curse in Nocturne Alley, sealed by a spell Mr. Bolin hadn't intended to help him open. Roger walked the hushed aisles, his shoes sounding loud in the quiet. Through his biocomputer vision, books glowed faintly or brightly with ambient magic. Most lay dormant, but many were ringed with complex chains of light, wards that warned of danger. He had a target. He lifted the heavy runes, Inscription of the Soul first. Madame Pince sniffed at the title but said nothing. When his hand moved toward a brick-thick volume stamped with a snarling skull, Secrets of the Darkest Art, Madame Pince jumped as if stung. "Mr. Lewis, that book is far too dangerous for you." "Absolutely not." Roger was ready. He produced his shield at once. "Professor Quirrell's note grants me access to relevant works. Would you like to ask him yourself?" He accented the phrase relevant works. "But Mr. Lewis," Madame Pince replied, almost snatching the permit and pointing at Quirrell's wording, "Professor Quirrell only approved books on runes." She emphasized the key word. Roger opened the heavy front page of Secrets of the Darkest Art and revealed lines of twisted ancient runes. "Madam, look," he said, blinking innocently. "The whole book is written in runes. Doesn't that make it a book on runes?" Madame Pince was momentarily speechless, her brows knit in confusion at the logic. Roger pressed his advantage and offered a compromise with the right touch of deference. "Why don't you check with Professor Quirrell now? If he says this book is outside the permission, I'll put it back immediately. No argument." He knew Madame Pince would be reluctant, if not afraid, to bother Quirrell. As he walked away, his hand already opening the book a little, Madame Pince worried. Frowning, she murmured to herself, "Just in case, I'd better tell Albus." 24. Transformation successful? Late that night, Roger slipped into the room of requirement and began his first transformation experiment. Traditional animagus magic only allows a witch or wizard to turn into one fixed animal. The form is determined by the soul's nature and cannot be chosen. The old texts treat it like a surviving fragment of far more dangerous, bizarre transformation magics. Modern wizards had taken the relatively safe, incomplete version and passed it down. The rest, far more powerful, were lost or forgotten because the risks were too great. Even so, only a handful ever master this fragmentary spell. Across the wizarding world, there were only 7 legally registered animagi on file at the Ministry of Magic, including Professor McGonagall. Unregistered ones from the original stories, Sirius Black, Peter Pettigrew, Rita Skeeter, could be counted on one hand. Roger had studied the canonical animagus methods. They read like an arcane ritual. They rely on specific weather, herbs, and other natural sources of magic. The practitioner ingests and absorbs them through elaborate steps until the transformation finally triggers. The whole thing resembles tending a magical plant. But the transformation system Roger had worked out himself ran on an entirely different principle: cleaner, more direct. The key, he concluded, was to locate the switch deep in the soul that controls transformation. Yes, a single switch. The theory: find the core node in the soul's magical pattern, flip it, and reroute the flow of magic into a new, stable loop. Achieve transformation. On the roomy floor of the room of requirement, Roger's shape flickered constantly. One moment a jet-black raven beating its wings, the next a lithe gray wolf, the next an inconspicuous ladybird. Without doubt, the soul switch system worked. But when he tried to target a magical beast, a Cerberus, a crushing sense of crisis seized him. He could clearly sense that if he forced Crucio or a restoration charm against those key nodes, he would lose control, either become some unknown horror or die outright. Clearly, those nodes were not the switch to a magical beast form, or his current power was insufficient to flip them. After a long, frustrating session, Roger finally stopped and had to admit he'd underestimated the difficulty of turning into a magical creature. He paced the room, thinking aloud, maybe he had to take a step back. Turn an ordinary animal into a magical one first, or transform into a magical plant. Turn a teacup into wolfsbane or a mandrake. A new line of thought circled in his head. When he left the room of requirement, the night was deep. He felt no sleepiness. He strolled along with his wand, flicking between his fingers, shifting shape at will. Now a nimble red fox, now a bat, then a swift red deer, then a clever squirrel. Forms flowed across him like clothing. Unconsciously, he wandered back to the familiar door, hiding the Cerberus. He intended to study the beast's magical pattern again, to look for a new breakthrough. My dear student, this is not a place you should be. Just as Roger focused on decoding the violent, intricate patterns within the three-headed dog, a voice spoke from the shadows behind him. Low, pleasant, and carrying a dangerous magnetism that chilled him to the bone. Every hair on his body rose. He would never mistake that voice. Lord Voldemort, not Quirrell. He had wondered why the Dark Lord had not yet made a move. Now, here he was. Whether to steal the stone or merely scout, the figure was standing right at the door guarding it. Even worse, Roger had blundered straight into the crime scene. In an instant, 1,000 thoughts raced through his head. The other had not struck. Perhaps unaware Roger had recognized him. There was still a chance. He forced himself to stay calm, turned with a stiff smile, ready to claim he was lost and greet Professor Quirrell, and froze. Behind Quirrell, Albus Dumbledore stood quietly, eyes inscrutable behind half-moon spectacles. Roger felt as if a troll had smashed his skull. Dumbledore and Quirrell here together to check on the stone? Or had Quirrell been caught? If a fight broke out, where should he hide? Would Voldemort take him hostage? While his mind reeled, the world twisted, and in the next instant, he was in the headmaster's office at Hogwarts. With a soft pop, Roger's wand appeared in Dumbledore's hand. Dumbledore turned it over lightly. No maker's mark, he observed, voice calm but heavy. Clearly not from Ollivander's reputable shop. More importantly, his blue eyes sharpened. Traces of an unforgivable curse, recently cast. Do you have anything to say about that? Roger swallowed hard and took in the rest of the office. At this hour, there was quite a gathering. Professor McGonagall, stern. Professor Snape, expressionless as a statue. Professor Sprout, worry bright in her eyes. And Professor Quirrell, shrinking behind the others. The wand was being passed around. I only recently taught him the re-restoration charm and the werewolf restoration spell. Quirrell stammered, his face a mask of injured innocence. He felt utterly wronged. When Voldemort had seized his body to tutor Roger, Quirrell had been a muddled mess, completely unaware of what the Dark Lord said or taught. He could not even recall what he had written on the permission slip he'd given Roger. If the Dark Lord had been the one to teach those unforgivable curses, Quirrell was ruined. He had no way to defend himself. The thought of running out and shouting, "It was the one on the back of my head," flashed through him. It would not save him. Forget being sacked, he might be halfway to Azkaban already. He trembled inwardly, a pitiful wretch carrying out his master's orders, now betrayed by that master. Quirrell felt utterly doomed. 25. Interrogation. Roger understood instantly. Madame Pince had told Dumbledore about his borrowing forbidden dark arts books. Then, Dumbledore said, his voice even but edged with authority, would you care to explain? Roger forced away every stray thought. Headmaster, I was born into a family of dark wizards. In the home I grew up in, exposure to the unforgivable curses was ordinary. He met Dumbledore's eyes without flinching. Exposure? Dumbledore sighed softly. Behind his half-moon spectacles, his gaze sharpened. That's an understatement, Roger. Every wand carries a unique aura, and on yours I can smell the residue of the Cruciatus. Roger blinked. A wand with a scent. He had once heard Lord Voldemort speak of souls carrying distinctive scents. Wands, too? There was no time for theory. His eyes swept the professors' faces, then returned to Dumbledore. Yes, Headmaster. Tonight I cast Crucio. The room seemed to freeze. Dumbledore sat calm, but his eyes were fathomless. McGonagall looked stunned, hurt beyond words. Snape was impassive as ever. Professor Sprout twisted her fingers in worry. Quirrell cowered behind Sprout, terrified, though Roger could sense the Voldemort inside him quivering with a dark excitement. Dumbledore's voice turned cold as mountain ice. That is no justification. I was conducting an experiment, Roger said, untroubled. He had hurt no one with dark magic. If anything, he had used Crucio on himself. Was it a crime to prick yourself? Surely they wouldn't throw him into Azkaban for that. If they were that unreasonable, a reckless thought crossed his mind. Join Voldemort and be free to research. Worst case, flip the table now, expose Voldemort, force a duel in the headmaster's office. Failing that, he could always vanish as a ladybird, Rita Skeeter's trick. No one knew that of him. An experiment that required Crucio. McGonagall's voice cracked with fury. Her stare bored into him. You have crossed an unforgivable line. No, Roger smiled, meaningfully, glancing at Quirrell before settling his gaze on Dumbledore. Headmaster, you know I've been studying transfiguration, at the level of the soul. Indeed, Dumbledore nodded slowly. You seek to effect transformation by influencing the soul. I read your proposal, highly original. You've had some success, but to push further is difficult, so you experimented. But I succeeded. Roger cut him off and, without moving a muscle, summoned his wand. The tip flared with a sickly, heart-stopping green. Merlin's beard, Professor Sprout cried. Stop! Dumbledore, McGonagall, and Snape shouted in unison, wands at the ready. The green light did not strike another, it struck Roger. With a soft pop, he vanished. In his place sat a black raven, its feathers ghosted with the same eerie green. An animagus? No. Mistress of Transfiguration. McGonagall sensed the difference at once. This was not an ordinary animagus. Her transformations had never required Crucio. More startling, the raven spoke with Roger's voice. This is my transfiguration. I call it transformation magic. Dumbledore and McGonagall stared at each other in astonishment. No known animagus could speak. The shock was only beginning. Actually, I have more than one form, the raven added, pride barely contained. Even Snape's eyebrows rose. A dual-form animagus had not been seen for centuries. The wand light flared again. The raven dissolved into motes of green light and instantly reformed. Roger's shape flickered, peregrine, red fox, red deer, then settled on a fluffy squirrel. Pop! With another soft crack, Roger stood before them, only a little pale. The truth was clear. Roger had not cast a curse on anyone. He had woven Crucio into a self-created branch of transfiguration that targeted the soul, his own soul, to produce new, speakable, multiple animal transformations. It did not fit existing ministry categories. Silence filled the headmaster's office. McGonagall's mouth hung open. Her certainties had toppled. Snape pressed his lips together, inscrutable as he reassessed everything. Professor Sprout beamed. Hogwarts had always celebrated prodigies from the other houses. Here at last was a genius from Hufflepuff to shake the magical world. Quirrell swallowed. The tremor of Voldemort within him turned to ice. He understood why his master had called the boy Peer. This power exceeded many a Dark Lord's youthful promise. Dumbledore stepped forward and gently took Roger's wand. He turned it over in his hands, fingertips tracing the shaft as though reading runes. After a long study, he looked up, a mixture of curiosity and reluctant admiration in his face. Indeed, he said, there is Crucio residue, but it is peculiar, partly reversed, closer to an ancient restoration charm. A new spell, one that targets nodes of the soul with surgical precision, exquisite, audacious, demanding the highest skill. Then his tone sharpened, his gaze burning into Roger. Clearly, Roger, Crucio is not the only unforgivable you command. Cornered, Roger admitted the rest. I've mastered Imperio as well, and I used it to forge this transfiguration. Dumbledore was silent. Time seemed to pool behind his spectacles. Finally, in a surprisingly candid, almost puzzled murmur, he said, I'm not ashamed to tell you, Roger. Even at my age, faced with a youth of your gifts, treading the edge of power, I often feel at a loss. He paused, his gaze drifting beyond the room, as if looking into distant mists. I fear my guidance might become a fetter, and yet to stand aside risks watching you lose your way and fall into an abyss from which there is no return. The professors had misjudged him, but Dumbledore offered no condemnation. Instead, he handed the problem back to Roger, asking without words how he should be guided. Roger's command of dark and transformational magics, the raw, terrifying mastery he had just displayed, made the question heavier than any of them expected. Outside the castle, a full moon hung high, bathing the grounds in clear silver light. Dumbledore waved the others away, leaving only Roger. With a light tap of his wand, several plates of lemon drops, steaming pies, fresh sandwiches, and 2 cups of fragrant black tea appeared on the table. "How about some supper while we talk?" Dumbledore asked, winking playfully. His blue eyes twinkled behind his half-moon spectacles. "I hear you always have a good appetite. You must be starving after a night of research, yes?" Roger sank into the chair opposite him and bit hungrily into a sandwich. Once he'd swallowed, he went straight to the point. "Headmaster, I don't think spells are inherently good or evil. Like a wand, they're tools. What matters is how a witch or wizard uses them." Dumbledore didn't answer right away. He lifted his teacup, sipped the warm black tea, and when he finally spoke, his voice was slow and deliberate. "Perhaps we should begin with the sorting ceremony." Roger blinked. The sudden leap in topic threw him off balance. How had they gone from the nature of spells to the sorting? He kept quiet, and Dumbledore continued as if reading his thoughts. "Do you know how the sorting hat decides where to place a new student?" he asked. Roger knew the standard answer, but he couldn't guess what scheme the inscrutable headmaster had in mind, so he listened. "The sorting hat is no mere hat," Dumbledore said. "It is an ancient alchemical artifact. It perceives more than thoughts." He let the sentence hang, and then added, "It perceives a child's soul, its innate nature. It senses a person's aura." "Hear that, and you know you're not the only one," Dumbledore said, smiling at Roger's reaction. "It's not simply legilimency. Every soul emits a unique quality. Some like a gloomy mist, some like fearless flame, others like a clear stream. That quality is the foundation of who they are." The word soul aura skittered across Roger's mind. He'd heard of it from Voldemort, and now Dumbledore was saying much the same. If both of the greatest names in the wizarding world considered the aura real, it deserved attention. Magic that touched the soul was almost always frowned on. Voldemort studied it for immortality, understandable enough. Dumbledore's interest felt darker to imagine. What could he be pursuing? "The sorting hat," Dumbledore went on, leaning forward, "is an extension of a very old magic tied to this castle." Roger had expected to be surprised. Instead, Dumbledore looked the one taken aback. "It seems I underestimated you," he said softly. "From the moment a new student's name is written in the admissions book until they cross the Black Lake by boat, what appears to be a simple sequence of events is actually part of a grand ritual that unfolds over years," Dumbledore explained. Roger's heart raced. A ritual spanning that whole process had never occurred to him. Not even his biocomputer had detected anything like it. "The purpose of the ritual," Roger ventured after a moment's thought, "is to identify the new student's soul aura." "Exactly," Dumbledore said with a pleased smile. "I was almost tempted to award Hufflepuff 5 points." The mood lightened for a beat, like a teacher sharing a private delight with a promising pupil. Then his face sobered. "A person's true nature, the cornerstone of the soul, cannot be easily changed. It can be suppressed or concealed, but it tends to reveal itself. The sorting hat weighs both the core nature and the student's deepest desires." "But human nature is complicated," Dumbledore added. "It cannot be reduced to tidy categories: bravery, loyalty, cunning, ambition. Those words are helpful, but they miss the messier truth." Roger agreed. "Children are simpler, their minds still relatively pure, which is why sorting works best at 11 or 12. Dumbledore's expression turned serious as he fixed Roger with an intent look. "And precisely because a soul's core endures, the aura it carries can be contaminated and distorted by external forces." A chill went through Roger. He heard the direction Dumbledore was heading. "The dark arts are such a force," Dumbledore said. They don't merely produce power, they feed on malice. The more hatred and cruelty you pour into a spell, the stronger it becomes, and the more it boomerangs back to erode the caster. The dark arts can pollute a soul's aura. They can, over time, twist it. Few people understood that the true danger of the dark arts wasn't merely their potency, but the moral corrosion they demanded. Roger, a transmigrator used to strange phenomena, found the claim unsettling. It sounded almost like a theory of suggestion. But in a world where transmigration and an unkillable Dark Lord were facts, he couldn't dismiss it. "You might ask," Dumbledore said quietly, "if a person's core can really change. It can't be fundamentally altered," he continued, "but life is a series of choices. Imagine a newborn soul as a cup of clear water. Different choices add colors and flavors. It's still water, but the mixture becomes uniquely theirs." "Do you understand my concern?" Dumbledore asked at last. His voice was grave. "Do you worry I might have misjudged the danger of studying darkness? Or worse, allowed it to change me?" Roger frowned. Could repeated exposure to evil truly shift one's essence? He couldn't say. He felt half skeptical and half convinced. Dumbledore's next words came softer, almost like a confession. "This isn't a headmaster's edict," he said. "It's the counsel of an old man who has lived a long life." When they stepped out of the headmaster's office later that night, Dumbledore took Roger's wand and handed him a different one, the wand Dumbledore had used in his youth. He insisted Roger not dabble in the dark arts, especially the Unforgivable Curses. Roger understood that the gifted wand was more of a monitor than a favor. At the same time, Dumbledore opened other doors. Roger could come to him any time to discuss magical research. He left with a thick stack of today's Transfiguration journals and unlimited borrowing privileges in the library's restricted section. Everything except materials on the dark arts. The journals were heavy in Roger's arms on the walk back to the dormitory. He flipped one open and froze. They covered decades, more than 40 years' worth. It seemed Dumbledore had given him his entire stock. "This headmaster isn't so bad," Roger thought as he trudged along. "I'll get a real wand from Nocturnally's black market over the summer holiday. No harm in that." 27. Fire Dragon Transformation Spell. The next day, Roger went to class as usual. Whatever had happened the night before seemed to have stayed among the professors. The students' expressions were unchanged. Still, Roger felt a subtle difference in the way some professors looked at him. Professor Flitwick's gaze, for example, had been a touch softer than before. In Charms, Flitwick stood on his precarious stack of books and explained the essentials of the levitation charm with his usual breathless enthusiasm. Roger had mastered it long ago and let his mind wander. Dumbledore had forbidden him from using the dark arts, which left his options for offense and survival worryingly thin. He only had first-year basic spells, plus 2 auxiliary charms, the Restoration Charm and the Werewolf Restoration spell, along with Transfiguration and the transformation techniques he had been tinkering with himself. That might be enough against ordinary wizards, but against real danger, especially someone like Lord Voldemort, it was far from sufficient. He needed more powerful offensive and defensive measures, and he needed them fast. In class, his thoughts ran over possible spells and tactics, but none of them fit. In the end, Roger decided to continue his own research. Since fully transforming into a magical creature was still out of reach, he would begin by transfiguring objects into magical plants. Dumbledore's stack of today's Transfiguration journals would be useful. This would lay the groundwork for future transfiguration into animals and also meet an immediate need. Many magical plants have formidable combat abilities, some nearly rivaling magical creatures. The Devil's Snare that guarded the Philosopher's Stone, for instance, had few weaknesses aside from a fear of flame. The greenhouses held living specimens he could study with Professor Sprout, and that made the idea practical. Defensive measures, however, remained a mystery. It had only been a month since school began, and the year had been relatively quiet. Even if Voldemort was scheming, no major moves had been made yet. Dumbledore's attention would surely be fixed on the stone and Harry, so as long as Voldemort wasn't hunting him directly, Roger planned to keep his distance from the mess around the stone. "And whatever you do, don't forget that subtle wrist movement." Flitwick's squeaky voice pulled him back to the present. "Swish and flick. Enunciate the charm clearly. If you say it wrong, the consequences could be. For the first years, it was not easy. The feathers in front of Harry and Ron seemed welded to their desks. No matter how many times they shouted Wingardium Leviosa, the feathers refused to budge. Roger, by contrast, succeeded on his first try, and Flitwick awarded Hufflepuff 5 points on the spot. Gryffindor grew more anxious. Ron failed repeatedly. In frustration, he jabbed his wand at the feather, and poof, the feather caught fire. Harry scrambled to smother the flames with his hat. Hermione walked over, frowning, and pointed out the mistake bluntly. It's Wingardium. You need to lengthen the gar and enunciate, and watch your wrist. Publicly called out, Ron's face went beet red and he snapped. Fine. Since you're so clever, why don't you show us? Hermione waved her wand. Her result was less elegant than Roger's, but the feather wobbled and rose 4 inches off the desk. Flitwick awarded Gryffindor 3 points. Ron looked utterly humiliated, his face sour. When the bell rang, he dragged Harry out into the corridor and grumbled all the way. See? No wonder nobody likes her. Always acting like she's the smartest. So annoying. She has no idea how bothersome she is. Roger left straight for the restricted section of the library and pulled an ancient, dust-coated volume, The Art of Transfiguration, on becoming a dragon. He found a quiet corner and began to read. Not long after, Hermione appeared and sat near him. She wiped her face hurriedly and turned away when she saw him, but Roger caught the telltale redness around her eyes and faint tear tracks. He understood most of what had happened. He was soon absorbed in the book. An old hand had written in the margin, I have always suspected that my friend Fabian Hogan actually succeeded. He transformed and now soars above us as a dragon. The book told a wild story. Fabian Hogan, it said, believed that willpower was everything. The reason people could not transfigure into animals, he argued, was that their wills were not pure enough. If someone could truly and utterly believe they were a dragon, he thought, they might break the bonds of flesh and blood and become one. To test this, Fabian devised a shocking experiment. He captured a muggle and for 10 years repeatedly cast memory charms on him to implant the belief that he was a dragon. Hermione leaned forward and said in a small nasal voice, Roger, do you think I'm really annoying? Her voice was thick and she blinked back tears. Roger paused, looked up from the pages, and thought, why would you think that? No, never mind. Hermione flushed and tried to hide her face in her book, but she couldn't help glancing back. After a few seconds, she asked, quieter, I know people don't really like me. I don't want to be hated. Are we friends? Roger's expression softened. To him, Hermione was one of the most mature members of Harry's circle, but she was still young and vulnerable. Her conscientious, sharp edges would fit better in Hufflepuff, he thought. Aren't we already friends? He asked. Her face brightened as if a small lamp had been lit. You don't hate me, she said, the relief obvious. Why would I hate you? Roger smiled. Hermione laughed, the tension easing, though her eyes were still rimmed red. All right then, we're best friends. She leaned closer and lowered her voice. You seemed distracted in charms today. What were you thinking about? She nodded toward the book in his hands. Transfiguration research again? Your transfiguration is already so strong. I doubt many older students could match you. Encouraged, she sat beside him and opened her copy of Magical Theory. Roger read on. After 10 years, the Muggle had gone insane, convinced he was a dragon and unable to communicate. Fabian then attempted a final transfiguration on him. According to Fabian's ecstatic account, the moment the spell took effect, the man was covered in hard dragon scales and his face twisted into a hideous dragon head. Fabian had invited witnesses. When they arrived, they found only a half-collapsed shack and the air thick with the smell of sulfur and burning. There was no dragon to be seen. Because there were no independent witnesses, Fabian's peers dismissed his claims as delusion. He became obsessed, telling everyone he met that he had succeeded. Not long after, he himself vanished. As his only close friend, the compiler of the volume had gathered his notes and published them. At the back of the book was Fabian's so-called dragon transfiguration spell, a crude composite of a powerful memory charm blended with advanced transfiguration techniques. The compiler's signature at the end made Roger's scalp prickle. Enrico Flitwick, 1393. The date hit him like cold water. Enrico Flitwick, alive in 1393, contemporary with Nicholas Flamel. Roger felt the hair on his neck stand up. The thought that the little professor on his pile of books might have been around in that era, that he had compiled records of a method that tried to turn a man into a dragon, filled him with an unspeakable chill. Roger frowned, his face clouded. Until recently, he had poured all his energy into transfiguration and soul magic theory and only skimmed the potions notes the old wizard left behind. Over the past few days, he'd finally sat down and studied them properly, and he was beginning to put the pieces together. The old wizard's so-called immortality potion was really a kind of elixir of life. Taken continuously, it could extend a life. But its cost was brutal. The unicorn blood at its core brought with it a soul curse. That explained why the old wizard had been so irritable and drained, like a spent candle before his transmigration. He'd been drinking too much of the elixir. The curse had eroded his soul until it was nearly breaking. Suddenly, Roger understood why Lord Voldemort hadn't gone after the Philosopher's Stone yet. That elixir of life, dangerous as it was, could restore some of Voldemort's strength, so the stone wasn't an immediate necessity. The realization pressed down on Roger like an invisible weight. As for whether his dragon transfiguration spell would work on humans, he couldn't guarantee it. It hadn't worked on animals in some tests, and he hadn't used himself as a guinea pig. The answer, for now, was simply unknown. In the new Defense Against the Dark Arts class, Quirrell went through the textbook remedies for werewolf bites. It was all cliches, no insight, no spark. Quirrell's perfunctory teaching was a bad sign. It suggested he'd started acting, and the elixir of life, with its monstrous side effects, could not possibly satisfy Voldemort's true needs. Roger felt the time pressure tighten. In herbology, Professor Sprout was doing her best to explain the uses of dittany. Harry, Ron, and Draco were all distracted. Harry nudged Ron and said, fiddling with a sprig of dittany and glancing at Hermione, who was working in a group with Roger, "I think she heard you talking about her behind her back. You upset her." Ron's eyes widened. "Me? Upset her?" He sounded indignant. Harry looked worried. "Hermione's been sitting with Roger a lot lately. You shouldn't talk about her like that." "So what?" Ron shrugged stubbornly. "You've seen her. Always that know-it-all look." He scooped up a handful of compost with exaggerated disgust. "No wonder nobody likes her." "But shouldn't we do something?" Harry frowned. Hermione was clearly ignoring both of them. Even though she was a Gryffindor, she always chose to sit next to Roger. Worse, she refused to let Roger lend them his homework. They had to go through Wayne, taking a roundabout way, just to copy it. Draco Malfoy was bored out of his mind. He was talented, good at potions, spells, and flying, but he lacked Harry Potter's natural magnetism. Herbology was the last thing he wanted to be in. An hour or two in a greenhouse getting his hands dirty with useless plants. What annoyed him most was how the school seemed to revolve around Harry and Roger. Harry had suddenly become Gryffindor's seeker, and Roger had somehow caught Dean Snape's attention, called to his office for private lessons more than once. Professor Sprout was also giving Roger special treatment, even letting him help with dangerous plants in the greenhouse, things younger students shouldn't touch. Draco was rightly resentful. When herbology ended, Roger stayed. He wanted to use the biocomputer to scan the magical plants in the greenhouse, especially his chosen transformation targets, Devil's Snare and Shadow Mushrooms. He pulled out a sheet of parchment and quickly sketched a magical structure diagram of the Devil's Snare. Not satisfied with a flat drawing, he waved his wand. The complex pattern rose into the air in shimmering lines. Countless filaments and nodes connected into a precise, mysterious whole. Plant magical structures were relatively simple, which made them easier for the biocomputer to analyze. Hermione hadn't left either. She'd stayed to help on her own. When she saw the glowing pattern floating there, she asked, curious, "What is that?" "A kind of special puzzle," Roger said. He wasn't worried about telling her. The pattern was based on the biocomputer's observations and transformation matrices. Even Dumbledore might not grasp it. Besides, Hermione kept confidences. "I'm looking for the key interface." He frowned. He felt like he'd hit a dead end, unable to find the switch that would trigger a transformation. "Puzzles? I used to do those," Hermione burst in, suddenly interested. If the pieces are all there, I can put them together quickly. Roger turned to her, eyes sharp. Hermione flushed and crossed her hands, unsure. You mean if a piece is missing, it's hard to finish? Roger pressed. Hermione answered earnestly, yes, especially with big puzzles. If even one piece is missing, you can go mad trying to find where it fits. I understand. It must be that, Roger exclaimed before she could finish. He grabbed her arm, excitement breaking out across his features. Hermione, you're brilliant. He tapped his wand precisely. The enormous floating diagram split into several core modules. Then he pointed at an inconspicuous aconite plant nearby. The biocomputer analyzed it, and a simplified magical structure diagram of the aconite formed beside the Devil's Snare modules. Like a conductor, Roger's wand orchestrated the lights. Points and lines spun, separated, and recombined. Modules from the Devil's Snare collided and compared with the aconite's simpler structure, testing possible connections. Look, Roger said, eyes alight. When you decompose the low magic aconite, it has fewer modules than the high magic Devil's Snare. So, an idea sharpened in his mind. He simulated a stream of pure magic output, using it to precisely fill the aconite diagram's missing parts. Then, as if plucking an invisible string, he tapped a key node with the tip of his wand. Hum. Instantly, more than 300 nodes and thousands of magical threads resonated in harmony. The light steadied, and to both their astonishment, locked into a flawless, integrated new structure. Perfect fit. Roger's voice trembled. His thought raced. If you can do this, then conversely, transforming a high magic organism into a lower magic one could require much less magic. The process would be faster and simpler. For example, let's try it this way. A flash of light leapt from the tip of his wand. Hermione stared at the sight before her and couldn't help but gasp, covering her mouth. 29. Soul and Blood. The cold November wind had already wrapped itself around Hogwarts, stinging cheeks wherever it blew. Inside the greenhouses, though, the air was warm and damp with the scent of earth. Roger was arranging dittany, aconite, and belladonna in their places for the next herbology lesson. He had practically lived in the greenhouses for the past month, studying magical plants so obsessively that even Dumbledore teased him about changing careers to become a herbologist. Professor Sprout was delighted. She'd long admired the gifted student, and now she let him come and go as he pleased. His research was going well, and Roger felt a rare lightness. Even during flying class, which he usually avoided, he found himself relaxed. Above the pitch, Draco and Harry chased one another like twin comets, neither giving an inch. Practice for the Quidditch Cup. As for Roger, he skimmed a few meters off the ground on the school's old comet, casually looking down while his right hand had quietly lent itself to a Devil's Snare vine coiling tight around the broom handle. Safety first. As Halloween neared, unease tightened in his chest. According to the familiar plot, Quirrell would release a troll on Halloween Eve to create chaos and try to reach the Philosopher's Stone, only to be intercepted by Snape. But Lord Voldemort's condition now seemed far stronger than the faint remnant soul in the original tale. What new, terrible variations might he introduce? Roger meant to keep a low profile, yet that evening he was summoned to Quirrell's office. Knock, 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 come in. The voice behind the door was clear and fluent, no stutter. Roger's stomach dropped. Quirrell, or rather the Lord Voldemort who sat behind Quirrell's face, greeted him. The professor lounged in an armchair, his posture elegant, one hand resting on the armrest as he watched Roger enter. Beside him sat a cage with an odd little bird inside, absurdly large, mournful eyes, and 6 messy, thin crest feathers that gave it a disordered, ridiculous look. Quirrell tapped the cage with his wand and said slowly, "You've come at the right time, my dear student. Help me process this little creature and extract its blood. An augury can produce about 5 pints, over 2 liters of blood. Just for that?" Roger couldn't tell what the man intended. A faint, almost mocking curl at the corner of Quirrell's mouth suggested he'd read Roger's thoughts. "You've always been curious about the soul," he said. "Here's your chance. Drawing blood from an augury is a lesson in insight into the soul." He paused, amusement in his voice. "Or has herbology made you lose your taste for such things?" How could he not be interested? But the timing, right before Halloween, set alarm bells ringing. Were they about to stage something under Dumbledore's nose? Roger's acclumency went up on instinct. On his face, he wore an expression of innocent curiosity. "I'd be happy to help," he said. He reached out and touched the cold bars of the cage. The augury inside seemed frail. "Professor," he asked cautiously, "does this augury really have that much blood?" Quirrell seemed to relish the moment like a teacher showing a point. "Don't measure it by mundane muggle biology," he said. "In our theory, blood is an extension of the soul. Squeeze out the soul and you get about 5 pints. Roger's breath caught. The Dark Lord, who so despised muggles, was applying muggle biology? Seeing Roger's surprise, Quirrell added, crisp and cold, "There is no shame in learning from the weak. Weakness and ignorance are not obstacles to survival. Arrogance is." Roger was momentarily speechless. The Lord Voldemort in the original tale had been a fragment, weak and muddled, prone to arrogance and error. This man, however, spoke with clarity and a kind of dark philosophy. If he was truly returning in earnest, with such method and reason, how much more dangerous would he be? Could Dumbledore and the Order of the Phoenix hold him back? Quirrell waved his wand. A heavy book thudded from the shelf onto the coffee table. He opened it and pointed at the text, speaking steadily, his voice carrying a quiet, irresistible authority. "For us, blood appears to come from the marrow, but its true source is the soul. In theory, as long as the soul is intact, any wound can be mended, the principle behind the restoration charm I mentioned earlier. But once the soul is damaged," his tone turned cold, "as the Cruciatus Curse does, healing becomes extraordinarily difficult." He tapped his wand again. A line of shimmering, ghostly text rose into the air. "By that logic, a soul-shattering curse is the perfect method for extracting blood. Cast the spell while you draw the blood, and it continually forces the soul to produce more, squeezing it out." With a graceful flick, the shivering augury floated out of its cage and lay on the tabletop. "There's also a bone-shattering curse that squeezes the marrow until not a drop remains," Quirrell added, as casually as if discussing the weather, "but that's not necessary. Better yet, after draining the veins, use the soul-shattering curse before it finally stops breathing to squeeze out the purest soul blood. That blood is richest in spirit, and many top-tier potions require it." Roger's blood ran cold. Voldemort's research into the soul had reached depths that made his scalp prickle. "All right," Quirrell said, voice laced with command. "You try." Roger hesitated. "Professor, I won't use the dark arts." The 2 curses Quirrell had named were undeniably dark, crafted for torture and domination. Quirrell's mouth curved, playful and dangerous. "I am not like Dumbledore," he said. "Too many restraints are only shackles. Take it." Before Roger could think, Quirrell tossed his wand. It felt warm with his owner's heat when Roger caught it. He began the incantation over the trembling augury. Quirrell guided him softly from the side. Slower, even slower. "Don't let it die too quickly. The longer the death is prolonged, the stronger the magic in the extracted blood will be." "Why?" Roger asked. Quirrell's voice was magnetic. "Because the soul is the bridge between matter and magic. At the moment of death, it's like a floodgate thrown open. Pure power rushes out." Roger began to understand the theory. In Voldemort's view, the soul connects to some source of magic. Death opens the door and lets that magic surge free. Yet the biocomputer showed only a limited increase in magical concentration from this method. The augury was magical, but its blood's enchantment barely rose. Why? Was the augury's soul too weak? Was there little correlation between a creature's magical pattern and its soul? Voldemort answered that thought, not aloud, but in the cold certainty threaded through his next words. "A creature like the augury has magic, but no intelligence. Their souls are far less full than a human's. Only intelligent life, especially humans, at the moment of death can release such a majestic surge of magic." Roger's heart leapt. He understood, in a flash of horror, why creating a Horcrux requires murder. The procedure he watched before him mirrored the slow extraction of soul blood. The realization slithered into his mind like a venomous thing. Different people must release different amounts of magic upon death. The more powerful the life, the greater the outflow. If the energy were large enough, could one, however briefly, create something like a philosopher's stone? He recoiled from the thought, human experimentation, and fear snapped him back. But another thought came, darker and colder, crawling up from the same place in his mind. "He won't choose me as the next one, will he? Halloween at Hogwarts was a sight to behold. The Great Hall was brilliantly lit and buzzing with excitement. Giant jack-o'-lanterns floated beneath the enchanted ceiling, their flickering candlelight casting a warm, festive glow over the tables. The feast was far more lavish than usual. Even the platters were exquisite. Dumbledore had invited a wizarding band to play, their strange but melodic tunes drifting through the hall. Then Professor Quirrell staggered in, his face as pale as a painted wall. He rushed to the high table and nearly collapsed at Dumbledore's feet, gasping, "Troll! Troll! In the dungeons! You ought to know!" His legs gave way before he could finish. With a thud, he fell flat and fainted. A troll! The Great Hall erupted. Even without magic, these lumbering brutes were terrifying. The Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures had rated them XXXX, the same level as a phoenix or the unicorns in the Forbidden Forest. First-year textbooks had warned about them. Over 12 feet tall, over a ton in weight, skin like gray stone with high magical resistance, and a stench to fell a person. Goblins even trained them as guards. Dumbledore raised his wand. Brilliant purple sparks cracked and fanned out, trying to calm the panic. "Prefects," he ordered, his voice low and strong. "Lead the students of your houses back to the dormitories immediately. Move." The prefects shouted instructions, shepherding younger students out. Dumbledore hurried from the hall with the other professors to search the castle. No one noticed Quirrell's eyes opening as he lay on the floor. He scrambled to his feet and fled up the marble staircase like a frightened rat. Professor Snape's sharp gaze flicked to the movement, and he followed silently. Roger saw more, a few first years slipping away, and, more alarmingly, Harry and Ron following Snape out the back. Even more surprising, Draco Malfoy had taken Crabbe and Goyle and slipped out through a side door, heading toward the dungeons where the troll had been reported. Roger's heart lurched. In the original version of the story, the troll had ended up in a bathroom and Hermione had been in danger there. Now Hermione was at his side, and Malfoy was actually going after the troll. This was completely off the script. If Malfoy really ran into the troll, things would go badly, disastrously. Malfoy might be arrogant, but he was only 11. People could change. With the right guidance, he might yet turn out all right. Roger had no more time to think. He bolted after Malfoy. "Roger, where are you going?" Hermione grabbed his arm. Malfoy and the others ran toward the basement. They're courting a death wish. "I'm going too," Roger said. Hermione's jaw set. He could see the resolve in her eyes. They raced down a side passage after the retreating figures. Rounding a corner, they were hit by a monstrous stench, like years of unwashed socks mixed with the foulest public latrine. Hermione gagged. Roger didn't have to answer. A low grumbling and the heavy thud of massive feet announced the troll's approach, and boys' voices trembled down the corridor. At the far end, a hulking shape loomed, dragging a terrifyingly thick wooden club. Each step made the floor tremble. "I'll go over. You stay here," Roger whispered to Hermione. "Okay," she whispered back, though her hands were shaking. The troll closed on Malfoy and his cronies. Draco clamped a hand over his nose, trying not to retch. His other hand held his wand, his voice wobbling but pitched high with bravado. "Goyle, Crabbe, wands, get 'em! If we take this thing down, we'll be heroes. Potter and Weasley will eat their words." "But," Goyle's voice shook, "can we really beat this thing?" "Shut up, Goyle," Draco snapped. "Use the levitation charm. Big things are easiest. Crabbe, do the levitation charm to send its club flying. Goyle, cast the wand lighting charm to dazzle it. Quick!" The troll, seeing tiny wands pointed at it, roared with fury. It swung its club in a devastating arc. The wind from the blow whistled through the corridor. The three boys' courage evaporated. They scrambled back, trapped at the end of the passage as the troll closed in, its bulk filling the hall. They cowered together and screamed. "Merlin's beard! Professor Snape, help! It's over. We're dead. Crabbe, stop whining. Shout for a professor with me." Draco's voice was a squeal. The screams only made the troll angrier. It dragged its club forward and roared again. Then something else happened. From behind the troll, dozens of thick vines shot up, writhing like living snakes. Devil's Snare surged over the floor, glossy and faintly green, and coiled around the troll's limbs and neck. The creature thrashed, muffled roars turning into strangled bellows as it swung its club wildly, smashing stone and showering the corridor with rubble. The vines tightened like chains. In minutes, the troll was pinned in a writhing green cocoon. It convulsed, then sagged. Deprived of oxygen, it collapsed like a small mountain, unconscious. The club clattered at the feet of the three boys, who shrank back into the corner, pale and trembling. When the devil's snare withered and vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, the three managed to help one another to their feet. They looked around in stunned confusion. Who did that?" Draco stammered, his voice cracking. Roger was the first to step out from behind the troll's enormous body, forcing a smile onto his face. Hermione came out after him, her heart racing as she looked at the fallen creature. "Are you guys all right?" Roger asked, smiling. "You all right?" Roger called, smiling and waving. "No." Draco's voice shook. He still hadn't expected Roger to be the one to save him. Footsteps thundered down the corridor, hurrying, echoing, followed by a distant roar, the thud of a club, and the rustle of vines. The whole castle had been roused. Professor McGonagall burst in first, face ashen. Professor Flitwick followed close behind, and Professor Sprout came last, studying the bedraggled remains of Devil's Snare on the floor with a thoughtful frown. Flitwick hurried over to examine the fallen troll. McGonagall's gaze landed on the 5 students like a thrown icicle. Her lips were white with fury. "You 5, lucky not to have been flattened by that creature, and you actually knocked it out?" Disbelief and lingering dread laced her tone as she swept her sharp eyes over the battle marks and the vines that were already starting to shrivel. Professor McGonagall," Draco stammered. "Roger and Hermione came to rescue us. We'd taken a shortcut to potions to fetch something we'd left behind, and we ran straight into it." "Yeah?" Crabbe and Goyle nodded frantically. "Just fetching things. Roger and Hermione found us." The 3 Slytherins told the small lie to save face. It hardly mattered now. McGonagall studied them, then said sternly, "Even so, you 3 have broken school rules, ignoring prefects, acting alone, neither reporting to a professor nor gaining permission. You nearly caused a disaster." After checking that none of them were hurt, her expression softened a fraction, though her brows remained tightly knit. "Malfoy, Crabbe, Goyle, 15 points from Slytherin, 5 each. Back to your common room at once. No detours." She turned to Roger and Hermione. "As for you 2, her voice softened, "you were extraordinarily lucky. Few first years would face an adult troll, let alone subdue it." Actually," Hermione murmured, "I didn't do anything." McGonagall paused, glanced at the nearly vanished vines, and then nodded. "Your courage earns 5 points each for Hufflepuff and Gryffindor. I shall inform Headmaster Dumbledore. Off you go." High in a tower, Quirrell leaned against the wall, barely keeping on his feet. "Master," he whispered, voice trembling, I'm too dull to understand. Why not seize the chance to take the Philosopher's Stone? Now would be perfect." Voldemort's voice hissed from the back of his head like a viper dripping scorn. "Fool! You think Albus Dumbledore as blind as you are? One troll as a diversion?" He laughed, cold and small. "They were ready. Any first year could handle that brute. And you," the voice turned lethal, "you've already been marked." At that moment, the air in the room seemed to harden. Knock, knock, knock. Sharp on the door. Quirrell jumped, his wand tight in his fist. He froze as the door opened and Severus Snape stood on the threshold, face thunderous. One leg was mangled. The hem of his black robe was soaked dark with blood, droplets spattering the cold flagstones. "Snape?" Quirrell's voice cracked. Remembering his master, he tried to straighten and blustered. "What do you want?" Snape said nothing. He dragged his injured leg forward and stepped into the room. The smell of blood and the weight of his presence pressed Quirrell backward until his spine hit the wall. Cornered, Quirrell whimpered, "What are you doing?" "Of late," Snape said, his voice a cellar-cold hush, "you have shown undue interest in matters that do not concern you. You know exactly what I mean, and what it implies." "Severus, I haven't," Quirrell stammered. "Do not make me your enemy, Quirrell." Snape closed the distance. The force of his stare made the air feel thin. Quirrell shrank into the corner, voice breaking. "I haven't, truly. You know exactly what I mean." A muffled, brutish roar from the corridor echoed, and Snape's eyes flicked toward it. He delivered a final, low warning. "You still have time to think this through. Decide who it is you're truly serving. A cold, mirthless smile tugged at his lips. I'm rather curious to see what tricks you'll pull. The door banged open as he left, robes billowing like a storm as he strode into the gloom of the corridor, the scent of blood and cold fury trailing after him. Voldemort's voice slithered into Quirrell's ear like a viper. See, Quirrell, your every move is watched. Touch the Philosopher's Stone today, and you know full well what will follow. Quirrell went rigid as if struck by petrification. His breath stalled, and words died in his throat. Voldemort's tone turned an icy whisper. You, carry on as planned. See, continue? Quirrell's mind blanked. They already suspected him. Why persist? How would that serve the Dark Lord? His throat was dry as paper. He swallowed and stammered. My lord, they already suspect me. Should we still proceed? Will this really help? A fool must do what fools do best. Voldemort snapped, his voice like a whip. There was no patience for hesitation. The command sank in like a poisoned icicle. Watch Harry Potter, and that Roger Lewis. Quirrell's eyes snapped back to where Snape had been, jealousy and resentment roiling inside him. Snape, once the Dark Lord's favored servant, had become Dumbledore's trusted deputy. Quirrell had gone to the forests of Albania to seek out his master's shattered remnant, had toiled to restore him, and now he alone would be asked to risk everything to steal the Philosopher's Stone and grant his master full rebirth. The glory would be his. He told himself no one could stop him. No one. The troll incident spread through Hogwarts like a ripple and then slowly stilled. The Malfoy trio found the affair too humiliating to repeat. The professors, for the sake of the school, smoothed the matter over and said little. But some changes took root. One breakfast in the Great Hall, as students ate, Draco Malfoy stood in the doorway watching Roger and Hermione enter. The hall seemed to tighten. Malfoy, who had often spat the slur mudblood at them, spoke loudly enough for them to hear. Thanks. The Malfoy family remembers a debt. He turned and walked straight to the Slytherin table. From that moment, his manner toward Roger, Hermione, and other Muggle-born classmates softened. Shared peril had, however fragilely, cracked something in him. Hermione slid down onto the bench beside Roger and glanced toward the Slytherin table. What do you think Malfoy is plotting? She asked, though she was not truly worried. She had seen Roger's calm skill and knew Malfoy's tricks were usually outmatched. Roger looked up from a plate piled high, cheeks rounded as he chewed. His expression was casual, but his eyes were steady. Malfoy's not bad at heart, he said around a mouthful. He just needs better guidance. Malfoy was on the edge of their thoughts. Roger's mind kept returning to Quirrell. Professor Snape had clearly been injured, limping after following Quirrell into the forbidden third-floor corridor, perhaps even fighting. Yet, Quirrell had come out unscathed and Dumbledore had not appeared ruffled. A Dark Lord who had learned caution was a far more dangerous thing. Roger reminded himself, this was no time to show his hand. The deeper his cards stayed hidden, the safer he was. Hermione, quick as ever, caught the implication. Draco was raised in a pure-blood home rife with Death Eaters, she said softly. He practically learned prejudice by rote. Across the hall at the Gryffindor table, Harry sat bolt upright, as if pricked. Ron, I just thought of something. What is it? Ron looked up, attention snagged. Snape, Harry said. What was he doing sneaking into that corridor? I've been wondering. Snape. He must be after whatever's hidden there. Ron whispered. He was acting weird. Exactly. Harry grew more suspicious. But what is it? Galleons? Some other treasure? Let's ask Hagrid. He's the one who fetched it from Gringotts, right? Ron rubbed his chin. Brilliant idea. Chapter 32. Where is Nicholas Flamel? The library on Christmas Eve smelled of dust and warmed parchment, but Roger's attention was buried in the book before him. Time raced toward the holidays, yet his routine remained ironclad. Dormitory, class, library, a straight, solitary line. He moved like a ghost, barely noticed. In every spare moment, his thoughts returned to his old obsession, magical creatures, especially the three-headed dog guarding the trapdoor. This time, he had a new plan. Apply his homemade magical patterns theory to transfigure a magical beast. Mapping the Cerberus's enormous, intricate mana pathways demanded astronomical computation, and the power to sustain such a transformation would be titanic. But those mountains weren't insurmountable. His biocomputer feared no volume of data. It only needed time, so it ran around the clock, building the Cerberus's mana map bit by bit. And for the inevitable shortfall of raw magic, the old wizard's stash of magic-sensing potion would do nicely. When the analysis finished, Roger planned to begin the transformation experiment. Traditional transfiguration insisted a wizard could not become a magical creature. Either a wizard's reserves were far too small, or human and beast souls were fundamentally different. Roger's data suggested the truth lay in two parts. First, the mana requirement was indeed enormous. Wizards with that kind of reserve were rare. Second, wizards simply could not construct the vast, precise mana patterns magical beasts possessed. Without a biocomputer cheat, human imagination working alone, like ordinary transfiguration, could not complete that level of simulation. His homework for the day was already done. He flipped through today's transfiguration while waiting. Beside him, Hermione read in silence. Wayne chewed a quill and scribbled furiously at a stack of overdue essays. Under the influence of Hogwarts' two brightest students, Wayne's improvement was obvious, especially in spell work. Credit went to Roger's biocomputer. It recorded every nuance of Wayne's incantations, caught tiny tone lapses and wand angle errors, and corrected them instantly. With that precision module backing him, Wayne's wand work had become solid. Later, in Hufflepuff's warm common room, the fire crackled as Roger still studied by lamplight. Wayne broke the comfortable silence. "Roger, thanks." Roger looked up from his notes, surprised. Wayne pointed at the open pages, sincere. "Honestly, I never thought I'd learn so much at Hogwarts. It's all because of you. Homework help, practicing spells, you share notes you worked on for hours. You're the kindest, most helpful Hufflepuff I've met." Roger blinked, taken aback by the blunt gratitude. Wayne kept going, words tumbling out. "Hermione's brilliant, Harry's the Quidditch star, Ron's brave. They only hang out with me because of you. I'm ordinary, bottom of the class in places. But thanks to you, I can earn a few points for the house." He finished firmly. "You're a real Hufflepuff, honest, kind, responsible. I just wanted you to know." Wayne flushed, muttered, "Good night," and buried himself under the covers. Even after his breathing steadied, Roger felt a weight he couldn't name. Sleep would not come. His hand drifted to the old wizard's book on his lap. Imperio, Crucio, Avada, the Scalpel of the Soul. To the silent owl Victor perched nearby, he whispered, "Even though I study dark arts and practice forbidden curses, I'm still a decent wizard, right? Even the little wizards think I am." Christmas approached, and the great hall gleamed with decoration. Fred and George Weasley were the center of attention, surrounded by students from every house. Hufflepuffs, Ravenclaws, even Slytherins. Ron leaned in, complaining about the twins' Hogsmeade shopping list. The prices were hardly friendship rates. "Of course, little Ronikins," George laughed, clapping him on the back. "There's an old proverb, clear accounts between brothers. Move on. Don't block our esteemed customers." Roger slipped into the crowd. "What are you doing?" Harry grinned. "This weekend's the first Hogsmeade trip. 3rd years and up can go." "I know," Roger said, "but first years can't. What's that to us?" Hogsmeade, a ministry-regulated wizarding village, was off-limits to first years. Harry nodded toward the twins. "Fred and George are running a proxy shopping service, lists and prices and everything. A bit steep, naturally." Hermione threaded forward briskly, whispering her list. 5 feet of parchment, 7 bottles of ink, 2 quick quotes quills. Fred scribbled. Ron tried to charm the girls, half joking. "Come on, Hermione, life isn't all parchment. Honeydukes is brilliant. Chocolate frogs and fizzing whizbees. Girls love them." Hermione ignored him and looked instead at Roger. "Want a quick quotes quill? They're super fast. You'd love one." Ron turned red and squirmed. Roger shrugged and ordered 2 quills from Fred. As he turned away, Harry caught his sleeve and lowered his voice. "Roger, something's up." They moved to a quiet corridor corner. Not trusting their privacy, Roger flicked his wand and murmured, "Muffliato." The background sounds muffled, as if heard through cotton. Harry's face was grave. "I think Snape's after whatever the Cerberus is guarding." He poured out what they knew, the slip from Hagrid, the name Nicholas Flamel. "It's connected to LeMay, but we can't find any trace of LeMay in the library." Roger feigned a flash of insight. "Try a history of magic. I think I saw the name in the 14th century alchemy section." He actually knew plenty about Nicholas Flamel and the Philosopher's Stone, and he suspected Dumbledore was orchestrating much of what happened at Hogwarts. Memories of the White Lord's interview still stung. He dared not interfere with the larger plan, so he gave only a nudge, hoping Harry would go confront whatever the darkness hid. Being noticed by both the Black and White Lords was suffocating. Harry and Ron exchanged a look and sprinted for the library. As they ran, Ron muttered, "He knew. Why not just say? Making us dig through that brick of a book. Look at the smug face." "Ron," Harry snapped, forcing him to halt and turn, "you should apologize to Hermione. Properly." "You really need to," he added, gripping Ron's shoulders. "Friends aren't where we dump our tempers." 33. Fearless Little Boy. The last echoes of Christmas had faded. The second half of term had begun, and Hogwarts lay peaceful and quiet. No more accidents. Yet the approaching final of the Quidditch Cup set every student's blood on fire. This year's champion would be decided between Gryffindor and Slytherin. Nearly the whole school poured out onto the Quidditch pitch. The stands were packed, tears rising dizzyingly into the air. Many spectators raised binoculars to follow the high-speed blur of players. The stadium divided neatly in two, scarlet and gold on one side, silver and green on the other. Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff students drifted where they pleased, but the scarlet and gold tide backing the Lions was clearly the louder. At the very top of each end, enormous banners snapped in the wind. One read, "Potter must win," the other, "Mighty Malfoy." Roger sat low in the stands and looked up at the slogans with a wry smile. A Quidditch match had somehow turned two first-years into superstars, staged like a duel between the savior and the final boss. If you wanted fame, he thought, hitching a ride on the hero's coattails was not a bad plan. Keep riding, and maybe you'd become the villain to match him. The real villain number one, however, sat calmly in the staff box. Professor Quirrell still had his habitual stoop, but his color and energy were far better than in the old story. Where the old timeline would have left him haggard from third-floor trials and poisoned by unicorn blood, he now looked neatly dressed and rosy-cheeked, watching the pitch with the keen delight of a true Quidditch fan. If Voldemort had kept still, everything might have been fine, but it seemed he had not entirely abandoned his designs on Harry. Madame Hooch's whistle split the air. The teams shot from the locker rooms like arrows released from a bow. The stadium exploded in thunderous cheers. Only a few hundred voices were enough to match the roar of a crowd 10,000 strong. Roger found a high spot with a clear view and swept his gaze across the staff box. Quirrell was riveted by the players, nothing else existing for him. Close by, Professor Snape stood out in his trademark black robes. At Hooch's signal, the players launched. The stands rose as one. Many spectators jumped to their feet, straining to pick out the speeding figures overhead. The noise threatened to lift the roof. Gryffindor commentator Lee Jordan barked in his frantic, off-the-cuff way, mixing play-by-play with chants. Anyone speaking had to shout into the next person's ear. What should have followed was the old routine, Quirrell silently jinxing Harry, Snape counter-jinxing and getting blamed. But this time, Hermione did not interfere. Although Ron had apologized when Harry demanded it, the rift between them had not fully healed. Hermione stood beside Roger and so never mistook Snape, never ran to set his robes alight, never accidentally saved Harry. Harry was flung about by his broom like a rag doll, pitching and rolling, seconds from smashing to the ground. Hermione watched in horror, nails digging into Roger's sleeve. "Roger, look at Snape," she cried, voice shaking, clutching his arm as if it were a lifeline. "It has to be him. He must know Harry found out about the Philosopher's Stone. Please, do something to save Harry." Since Harry had found Nicholas Flamel's name in the library, he'd come to Roger and Hermione to talk it over. At that moment, Roger longed to tell Hermione the real culprit was the unassuming Quirrell in the corner. With Snape watching, Harry was in no real danger. But when he met Hermione's anxious, hopeful eyes, his heart softened and refusal felt impossible. Ron had noticed Snape's odd movements too and prowled like an ant on a hot pan. At last, he could bear it no longer. He had to act, to strike at the man who looked to be harming Harry. The only spell that came to mind was the levitation charm. "Wingardium Leviosa," he choked, face scarlet, wand jabbed towards Snape in the hope of floating the professor and breaking his concentration. Nothing happened. He had even missed that moment in Charms when a frantic wand wave had set a feather alight. A bit of fire might work, he muttered, but his wand stayed stubbornly still. Tears of frustration gathered as his wand slashed the air. Then he saw Roger across the pitch give him a lightning-quick wink. A moment later, Roger's wand flicked, almost casually, and the enormous Slytherin banner overhead, Mighty Malfoy, tore free. Like a vast net, it crashed down and draped the entire staff box, Quirrell, Snape, and all, in green and silver cloth. The sudden mishap broke Harry's crisis at once and yanked every eye toward the professor's stand. Closest to the scene stood Ron, wand still raised, looking stunned. Ron had often dreamed of being the center of attention, but not like this. He expected cheers for saving Harry. Instead, he met stares of suspicion and blame. He tried to explain, but his tongue tangled. Point at Roger? He had no proof. And besides, that would make him look like a sneak with Hermione watching every move. Remembering Hermione's gaze, a reckless little boy courage surged through him. He decided a sacrifice was worth it. As Professor McGonagall and the other teachers marched up, he squared his shoulders and shouted, "I did it!" The air of a hero facing the gallows. Poor Ron was branded a troublemaker who disrupted the match and broken school rules, and he was marched dismally from the roaring pitch. Just as he reached the castle's shadow, Lee Jordan's ecstatic, cracking voice burst from the field. "He's got it! Harry Potter's caught the golden snitch. Gryffindor beats Slytherin 170-20. Glorious victory! Glorious Harry Potter! Our great seeker." Ron spun. Despair vanished, replaced by blazing joy, as if the epic triumph carried his own hefty share of glory. "Move along. You nearly ruined the match. Detention awaits," Filch growled, prodding him. "We won. We really won." Ron almost bounced. "I helped. Honestly, this victory has my name on it, too." "You?" Filch cackled. "Your contribution was breaking rules and earning detention." Ron grinned, eyes shining, and answered as if he'd won a duel. "Hey, believe it or not, that's exactly what it was." 34. Substitute Hogwarts Headmaster's Office. "Minerva, any word from Tiberius Ogden?" Dumbledore set down his quill, blue eyes peering over his half-moon spectacles. He remembered sending Roger's groundbreaking transfiguration results to today's transfiguration months earlier. In Dumbledore's view, the boy had a real chance at that year's Most Promising Newcomer award. Because he took the discovery seriously, Dumbledore had not rushed to submit preliminary notes. He waited until Roger's self-created polymorphic transformation had stabilized. That patience stretched into the second term of first year, January 1992, before he finally posted the full portfolio. Who could have guessed that Tiberius Ogden, the magazine's elderly editor-in-chief, would flatly refuse to believe it? The reply denounced the research as virtually violating Gamp's fundamental laws of transfiguration, and sneered, "Professor Dumbledore, it is regrettable you never became minister, but that surely does not entitle you to conjure a prodigy merely to polish Hogwarts' prestige." Awarding Most Promising Newcomer to a first year? An outrageous joke, Ogden insisted, even urging the Wizengamot to reassess Dumbledore's fitness as Chief Warlock. "Not yet," Professor McGonagall said, her face stern, her voice tight. "I sent a detailed rebuttal, but Tiberius himself is in Greece handling, a rather thorny affair. Apparently, he cannot spare attention for us at present." "Greece?" Dumbledore popped a lemon drop into his mouth and frowned. What could be so thorny that the editor-in-chief of today's Transfiguration must handle it personally? "No specifics," McGonagall shook her head. "But the Prophet reported last year that Greece may be facing large-scale werewolf activity." "Indeed, no small matter." Dumbledore's brows drew together. "Then Roger's award application." "Now rests entirely with Tiberius's editorial board," McGonagall said, indignation plain in her tone. "Rumor favors a fifth-year girl from Bobats. She's become an animagus and taken the unprecedented form of a sea anemone." "A sea anemone?" Dumbledore's snowy brows lifted. "Exactly," McGonagall sighed. "Part animal, part plant. The editors think it may herald animagus forms extending into flora." McGonagall herself had become an animagus as a student and had once won that same Most Promising Newcomer award. 40 years later, Transfiguration seemed becalmed, even regressing. Registered animi were fewer than before, and the award's standard had barely changed. Dumbledore shook his head gently. "The magical world can be a pond left unstirred too long, When ripples finally appear, some are too slow to recognize them. He considered for a moment, then decided, I suppose I must present the case to the Wizengamot myself. Shock crossed McGonagall's face. You intend to petition for him to receive the Order of Merlin? Dumbledore's reputation was immense. Chief Warlock, juror for the Merlin Prize, the wizard widely regarded as the most powerful and accomplished alive. A personal nomination from him would reverberate through the magical community. Does Roger's polymorphic transformation not merit an Order of Merlin? Dumbledore asked calmly. I don't mean that, Albus, McGonagall hurried to explain, though concern remained. Only, should we not consider the repercussions? Recusal? Dumbledore smiled, eyes twinkling. Rest assured, I shall nominate and nothing more. I will take no part in later deliberations. McGonagall exhaled and nodded. Before that, the application must be flawless. Merlin Prize standards are exacting. When Roger learnt Dumbledore intended to put him forward for the Order of Merlin, he was stunned. No 11-year-old had ever received it. When he heard the prize included a sack of galleons, his enthusiasm soared. Within a day, he had collated every theoretical derivation, experimental log, and effect report on his polymorphic transformation and handed the thick sheaf to the headmaster. Soon, Dumbledore, portfolio in hand, set off for the Wizengamot. The library smelled of parchment and old leather. Roger lounged in a corner as usual. Beside him, Hermione and Wayne wrestled with essays. His homework was done. His thoughts drifted instead to a darker project, the Soul Substitution Death Curse. The idea came from one of the many soul spells cataloged in the soul's scalpels, the Swap Soul Curse, which exchanged caster and victim souls. With offensive measures secured, Roger had turned to life-saving arts. Naturally, the Swap Soul Curse intrigued him. According to old notes and Lord Voldemort's theories about the soul, the Killing Curse is ultimate magic aimed straight at the soul. Picture it. The Killing Curse is a massive hammer striking a fragile soul wall. Tragically, the hammer's force is huge while the wall's strength is negligible. Roger knew he could not yet block that hammer or toughen his soul wall enough to endure it. So he devised a workaround, substitute another soul to take the fatal blow. For 2 days, he even paused work on Cerberus's magical pattern, diverting the biocomputer's cycles to decoding the Swap Soul Curse. With that curse, Voldemort's theories, and the Splinching Curse as references, modeling the new spell progressed smoothly. He caught several wild rabbits in the Forbidden Forest for trials, only to realize the approach was absurd. Drag a bunny into battle and frantically swap souls mid-incantation? The mental image alone mortified him. Next, he tried a different tack, the virtual soul. Thanks to the biocomputer's formidable observation and parsing power, he had stored vast data on common creatures' magical patterns, long suspected to be the outward forms of souls, and now he could test the hypothesis. The results brought a new discovery. Only a virtual replica of the caster's own soul pattern triggered the Swap Soul Curse. Patterns of other souls, rabbits for instance, did nothing. The experiment hinted that a magical pattern is not the soul itself. Yet why did mimicking his own pattern still activate the swap? The question wound through his thoughts like ivy. Just then, Professor Quirrell's nervous, slightly trembling voice called from the library doorway. Roger? A word in my office. The moment Roger stepped into Quirrell's office, the smell of garlic hit him, and the man's entire demeanor shifted. The timid stammer was gone. In its place settled a cold elegance that made Roger's skin prickle. Quirrell moved with slow, deliberate grace. He poured a glass of water, took a small sip, and then turned. A faint, amused smile curved his lips, and his snake-like eyes fixed on Roger with unnerving precision. My dear student, Lord Voldemort said, his voice smooth as oil. I can feel it. You are terrified, yet forcing yourself to appear composed. Ha, I knew that mask well myself, how I used it before Dumbledore. He seemed to savor the memory as he lounged back, his gaze probing. You are clever. You understand what I mean. Then you must also understand. Everything comes at a price, Roger. Every hair on Roger's arms rose, but his face stayed carefully blank. Professor, what do you mean? His hand was hidden in his robe, fingers closed around his wand. Deep in his mind, the virtual soul stirred, ready to counter a killing curse. Voldemort watched him with lazy amusement. Don't be hasty. He seemed wholly unconcerned with Roger's tiny movements. Why not talk about something else first? Aren't you curious why I give you private lessons? To teach you those unique aspects of soul magic? He watched Roger's expression change, as if admiring an intriguing specimen. Roger's heart sank. He couldn't make sense of this. Everyone knew why Voldemort had skulked into Hogwarts in the first place. The Philosopher's Stone, infinite magic, a way to return. Yet for months, the man had done nothing but teach. No scheme to steal the stone had surfaced. Instead of hiding his intentions, he was talking about them. Something in Roger's head clicked. There must be something he didn't know. Voldemort smiled and rose. He stepped toward Roger, looming, and his presence pressed down like winter. "I can sense the hostility in you," he said, voice sharp. "But from the beginning, when have I ever harmed you? On the contrary, I poured out my knowledge to you, guided you." He leaned in, his face inches from Roger's, eyes burning with feverish intensity. "And in your soul I saw fragments of the future. You have known who I am all along." Lightning seemed to explode in Roger's skull. When he had first set foot in this office, Voldemort had read his mind. Legilimency. He had seen the future shreds Roger had carried, those flashes that came from the life before his own. Of course, the man would have probed any first year's mind at once. And yet later, Roger had learned occlumency, had learned to hide that knowledge. The memory Voldemort had taken must have been limited. "Is that so?" Roger forced the words, dry in his mouth. He tried to sound calm. "Futile to pretend," Voldemort laughed. "A sound like a blade being polished. Your soul's aura betrays you. Ha!" His amusement turned manic. "Did you know? Your soul is extraordinary, so rare, a seer's soul." Roger blinked. A seer's soul? Had Voldemort mistaken transmigrator memories for prophecy? He had never heard of such a category in all his hours in the library. Seeing Roger's confusion only seemed to delight Voldemort more. He straightened and began to pace. "I told you, the soul links us to magic, yet some souls can reach behind the veil and glimpse the future. Those are seers' souls. True seers are born with the gift." His voice rose, greed flaring in his eyes. "And you, Roger, are the strongest seer's soul I have ever encountered. Your view of the future is vast and clear. I can hardly resist devouring you." Voldemort returned to his chair, savoring the moment. "Remember your first lesson? I thought then that Merlin himself had favored me, to put such a treasure in my hands. Imagine, if I dwell within your soul, wield your gift, see every twist of the future, how exquisite." Mad light flashed in his eyes. "Once I have the Philosopher's Stone, I can even be reborn inside your body. True immortality." His voice slid into a honeyed tone. "For that reason, I augmented your soul. An ancient, lost ritual of the soul. My private lessons were part of that rite. You must have noticed, your magic has grown astonishingly fast these months, and advanced spells come easily to you." Roger felt a cold rage. Another ritual, hidden in lessons he had trusted. Enrollment, the boat ride, classes, rituals everywhere, and he'd never sensed this one. If he survived, he promised himself, he'd study ritual magic until he understood every hidden sign. "But you can't get the stone," Roger said, buying time. "Professor Dumbledore has everything locked down." Voldemort smiled with contempt. "Dumbledore is indeed the greatest wizard alive, so what? He cannot kill me, nor prevent me from taking the stone." "If you could, you'd have taken it already," Roger retorted. "Then see for yourself." Voldemort raised his wand with an elegant flourish, its tip glinting. "Now, I will take you to claim the Philosopher's Stone, and afterward, you will have the honor of becoming part of me, merged into my eternal being." Roger's heart slammed against his ribs. Now, a very bad premonition flashed through him, cold and immediate. 36. On the Philosopher's Stone. Meanwhile, in Professor McGonagall's office. "You want to see Professor Dumbledore?" McGonagall was filing a stack of parchment into the archives. She glanced up at Harry, Ron, and Hermione, who had burst in like a searchlight, and her tone carried undisguised scrutiny. Why? Time felt like it was running out. Not long after Roger had been called away by Professor Quirrell, Harry and Ron had rushed to the library. Harry had pried some alarming news from Hagrid. A man in black had somehow tricked Hagrid into revealing the location of the restricted fourth-floor room. To Harry, that man in black was either Snape or you-know-who. He'd come to find Dumbledore at once. He could think of nothing else. Only Dumbledore could stop Snape now. It's a secret," Harry blurted, then immediately regretted it. McGonagall's eyes went cold, as if a thin sheet of ice had settled over them. "Professor Dumbledore is very busy," she said, voice clipped. "He left for London yesterday. He will not be back until tomorrow at the earliest." "He's gone? Not here at Hogwarts?" Harry's voice cracked. "But this is urgent. It can't wait." McGonagall's patience snapped. "Harry Potter, there are countless important matters for Dumbledore to handle every day at Hogwarts. No matter how urgent you think this is, can it be more important than the welfare of the whole school? Now, I suggest you three get some fresh air." She cut him off with an unmistakable gesture toward the door. Outside in the corridor, the air felt heavy and tight. "Snape must know the headmaster isn't here," Harry said through clenched teeth. "He'll make his move tonight. If we let tonight pass, there won't be another chance." "Then what do we do?" Hermione asked, panic making her voice small. She and Ron stared at Harry. Her face had gone pale. "We have to keep watch on Snape." "What about waiting for Roger?" Hermione ventured, still uneasy without him. "He's with Professor Quirrell. We could go watch the corridor and wait for him to come back before deciding." But there was no sign of Snape in his office or any of his usual haunts. To them, it seemed likely the cautious professor had already hidden himself, waiting for nightfall. Harry's jaw set. "Then there's only one choice. We go in ourselves and get the Philosopher's Stone before Snape does." Ron's mouth went dry. Hermione, perhaps steadied by Roger's presence earlier, reacted with horror. "Harry, are you insane? Didn't you see that big fellow, the three-headed dog? There are bound to be more deadly traps and spells beyond it. We can't get the stone. It would be suicide." A few steps away, the air shimmered almost imperceptibly. Lord Voldemort and Roger hovered like shadows erased from the world, hidden in the openness. Students passed by them, oblivious. Roger was shaken. "They can't see us at all?" he whispered, thinking of the time Voldemort had once slipped into Hogwarts unnoticed. Voldemort, having regained some strength, felt vast and terrible in ways Roger could not fathom. "Heh!" Voldemort let out a low, amused chuckle, his figure swaying like a reed. "See? As if these children could perceive my magic. Let alone them. If Dumbledore stood here, he would not see through me either." He watched the trio argue with the detached interest of someone watching a well-rehearsed play. When he heard Harry say, "If he gets the Philosopher's Stone, Lord Voldemort will return. I will never join him." Voldemort's smile froze into something hard and merciless. "Roger," he said, voice sharp as poisoned glass, "the world thinks it was this boy who lived who defeated me. Tonight, I will use the blood of my enemy to show them the truth." Despite Hermione's protests, Harry convinced them both. Under cover of night, they crept back to the dormitory and fetched the invisibility cloak. When darkness fully cloaked the castle, the three of them crawled beneath the thin, paper-like fabric and slipped into the forbidden fourth-floor corridor. "Sk, what a waste," Voldemort sneered softly. "Crude workmanship. A complete waste of a perfectly good demiguise hide." Harry, Ron, and Hermione made their way through the defenses, stumbling at times, but moving with a fluid certainty that suggested they had rehearsed it 100 times. Voldemort followed them like a shadow. He thought the so-called protections around the stone were laughably inadequate compared to the value of the stone itself. They looked less like safeguards and more like a series of tests, mousetraps designed not to keep out a dark wizard like him, but to evaluate those who would face them. Only the final obstacle, the Mirror of Erised, personally set by Dumbledore, seemed capable of stopping him. The rest would have been child's play for someone of Voldemort's power. The most peculiar, to his mind, was Snape's potion riddle, an antidote bottle that could pass through black flames. If Dumbledore truly wanted absolute protection, he could have ordered no antidote be left at all, or replaced them with poison, simple measures that would keep intruders out. Instead, the whole arrangement felt like a deliberate backdoor. The gauntlet seemed tailored to the characteristics of stalwarts like Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Neville, an entrance exam set up by Dumbledore. From that perspective, Harry's courage, determination, and quick thinking had exceeded expectations. He had aced the exam. Perhaps Dumbledore had set these trials to reveal Harry's potential, to see whether he could be entrusted with greater responsibilities later on. The final mirror, however, had a very different purpose. Dumbledore had bound it with magic that only Harry could unravel. Neither Quirrell nor Voldemort would be able to take the stone from it. Dumbledore's design, Voldemort suspected, was meant to lure him, his remnant, to the mirror and trap him like a rat. But plans change. At this moment, Voldemort had already slipped into the room, silent as a ghost, and stood before the mirror of Erised, the glass that showed a person's deepest desire. 37. Under the Philosopher's Stone. On the fourth floor of Hogwarts, inside the hidden chamber that held the mirror of Erised, a voice as cold as ice echoed from the shadows. "Harry Potter!" Harry spun around, his heart nearly stopping. "You? Professor Quirrell? Roger?" Roger stood behind Quirrell, or rather, behind Voldemort, his face hollow with resignation, dragged here against his will. Voldemort was so confident he hadn't even bothered to disarm him. Roger could feel his own wand in his hand, held ready. The slightest twitch would have invited a lethal curse. But he knew the calculation. Until Voldemort held the Philosopher's Stone, he was safe. Even if he resisted, Voldemort wouldn't waste the body he intended to use as a vessel. "Haha, for the moment you may still call me that," the voice crooned with a chilling laugh. "Meeting you here? An unexpected pleasure, wouldn't you say?" "But I thought it was Snape," Harry began, only to be cut off by a hiss of impatience. "Enough, foolish brat. The game ends now." Voldemort's contempt was a blade. He flicked his wand. Harry felt invisible cords yank him forward. His legs marched him to the mirror, while his mouth could only let out a desperate whimper. In the glass, he watched his reflection pull a blood-red stone from a pocket and tuck it back in. At the same instant, a warm, heavy weight settled into his trouser pocket, pressing against his thigh. The Philosopher's Stone materialized exactly as he'd seen it. Voldemort's pretense slipped away. Quirrell's trembling hands tore at the garlic-reeking purple turban. Embedded at the back of his skull glared a face, corpse pale, hairless, its eyes like coals, nostrils slit like a snake's. Wearing that horror, Quirrell, Voldemort's puppet, swept toward Harry, resurrection so near Voldemort could taste it. At the same moment, Roger realized the final chance to escape had come. Sss! Scores of viridian vines of Devil's Snare shot from the corners like striking adders, coiling around Quirrell Voldemort's arms while a sly tendril darted for Harry's pocket. "Petty tricks," Voldemort snorted. His wand spat a searing serpent of flame and licked the vines to black ash in an instant. The terrible face turned, Vos almost gentling into persuasion. "Roger," it said, "don't be foolish. Once I return, I will find you a perfect body, perhaps even the savior, before us. What say you?" Roger laughed, cold and cutting. "Devour my soul and be reborn in me? You think I'm 3? Do I look like a joke to you, Voldemort?" Lies might fool thugs and cowards, but not him. Every mote of dust, pebble, even drifting grit obeyed Roger's will. They sprouted new Devil's Snare and green tides that crashed again and again toward Voldemort, forming a living barrier between the Dark Lord and Harry. Roger held back, ready to become one last titanic vine for the killing strike. Impatience flared in Voldemort's nostrils. "I waste no breath. Once you are part of me, you will savor the vastness of souls. I can digest yours and let you taste others. Death, merely the gate to glorious rebirth." Weary of the assault, Voldemort slammed his wand downward. Finite incantatum. A silent, terrible blast washed the chamber. Every Devil's Snare, both old and newly grown, froze, withered, crumbled to dust, and was gone. Roger's pupils constricted. Voldemort had cast a spell of such power alone that it normally required several wizards. The mastery in that act was a kind of terror. Without pause, Voldemort's wand flashed up and aimed at Roger. "Farewell, my dear student. I, Tom Riddle, name you Roger Lewis, my one true apprentice of the dark arts." A thick, pale, jelly-like beam burst from the wand tip and expanded into an imprisoning net that sealed the space around Roger. For a second, the white mesh closed on empty air. Roger himself had vanished as if erased by a rubber. Voldemort's monstrous face registered nothing but the smug certainty of a victor. He had already cast wards. Nothing alive could leave the chamber. He raised his wand, crimson eyes sweeping the gloom, voice a serpent's hiss. "I smell you. The scent of your soul. You're here, planning an ambush, aren't you?" He unleashed a torrent of anti-concealment spells. Apparicium, hominum revelio, finite, invisibility nullify. The words crackled through the dimness like a shower of stings, each intended to tear away hiding places and reveal a soul. Each spell sank into the air as if against iron. Impossible, Voldemort snarled, the first fraying of frenzy in his voice. I sensed you. Your soul is here. You never left. Harry, bound by those invisible cords, could still see and hear. Dread and shock coiled around his heart like cold serpents. That pale, twisted face with the slit nostrils and red eyes was Voldemort himself. The vision battered Harry's skull like needles. He could not move a finger. He knew Roger was strong, far beyond their year. But to duel Voldemort head-on, even a withered husk, such as the Dark Lord, was still deadly. Harry's heart hammered as he wrestled against whatever compelled him, desperate to reach into his pocket and thrust the stone at Roger. Only Roger could keep it from Voldemort. Roger had not fled. He could not apparate, fly, or ride a broom. None of the usual escapes were possible. He was a common ladybug, clinging to a dusty high corner and watching Voldemort cycle through spells with cold, calculated patience. His transfiguration was not an illusion or a charm-maintained disguise, but a true change of essence. Roger had become another creature entirely. A top wizard hunting for magic disguises would never bother to look for a mere insect, and the dim light gave perfect cover. Yet it was only a stopgap. Any life detection spell, or any direct sensing of nearby souls, would unmask him at once, and Voldemort knew such spells. The Dark Lord's red eyes swept the chamber again, hungry for any sign of the soul he could not yet reach. Late at night, in the room at the end of the forbidden corridor on the 4th floor of Hogwarts, Lord Voldemort tried several more arcane soul detection spells. Finally, soul vision! An invisible ripple washed across the corner of the room. Aha! A ladybird? Voldemort's voice brimmed with smug triumph. He'd finally locked on to that peculiar soul fluctuation. I almost forgot about your troublesome animagus transformations. But now, Roger, do you need a refresher on the Imperio? Consider it a parting gift. Imperio, a viscous emerald green beam, thick with an oppressive hunger for control, lashed from Quirrell's wand like a serpent's tongue and struck straight at the ladybird in the corner. Just as the green light was about to consume its target, deep inside Roger's mind, the biocomputer kicked into overdrive. At impossible speed, it analyzed and mimicked the structure of Roger's soul and magic. A virtual soul shell, a shimmering, silvery white facsimile, snapped into place around Roger's true soul at the critical instant. The Imperio's malignant energy slammed into that shell, vibrating it violently, but could not penetrate to reach his real soul. Did it work? The substitute soul trick had worked. Voldemort at first only felt a strange emptiness, a lack of the total domination he expected. To someone who ruled souls as he did, that absence was ludicrous. The feedback from the soul before him made no sense. Then he realized Roger wasn't obeying like a puppet. The Imperio had failed. Rage flared across his features. Without hesitation, he flicked his wand for another curse. Crucio! After the green light flashed, the ladybird in the corner was still alive and fluttering. Seeing his cover blown and knowing the substitute soul was holding, Roger stopped hiding. With a burst of light, he shifted back into human form and positioned himself between Harry and Voldemort. His meaning was clear. The Philosopher's Stone wouldn't be taken so easily. Roger? Voldemort's voice dropped low. The face twisted on the back of Quirrell's head showed unpredictable expressions. I must admit, you are quite extraordinary. No one has ever been able to withstand my spells like this. I'm flattered, Roger cut in with a cold laugh. I didn't expect your final lesson to be so boring. Come with me, Roger. The corner of Voldemort's mouth twitched, then smoothed into his deadly seductive calm. He lowered the wand and spoke in a deep, coaxing voice. I have walked farther along the path of the soul than anyone. Even without the Philosopher's Stone, I can lead you to eternity. Dumbledore would bind you with rules, but I will never interfere with your research. All my knowledge will be yours, without reservation. From somewhere behind his frozen features, Harry made muffled sounds, rolling his eyes desperately to send Roger a message. Don't believe him. The cruelty of Voldemort's promises was obvious. Roger had been tempted before. He'd snuck to see Voldemort for private tutoring about soul magic, but following Voldemort entirely was unthinkable. Look at the man, hiding in a host, living off followers' donations, making grand promises he couldn't keep. Magic research might be a hungry, costly pursuit, but Hogwarts had a library, professors, most of them competent, and a free kitchen. If Voldemort would hand over the stone, honestly teach him soul magic, and reform, maybe that would be tempting. But if Voldemort could do that, he wouldn't be Voldemort. Roger kept silent. The chamber's air felt like it hardened around them. The substitute soul shell was working, but it was expensive. Both spells had taken a heavy toll, and Roger felt his magic nearly drained. The Philosopher's Stone had been taken. Dumbledore would sense the disturbance and return quickly. If Roger could stall, the tide might turn in his favor. Voldemort saw that too. The last hint of hesitation left his eyes. Ruthlessness took over. Fiend fire. A white, blazing serpent of flame erupted into being and instantly turned the room into a roiling sea of fire. Seizing the moment while Roger scrambled, unable to counterattack, Voldemort forced Quirrell's hand into Harry's pocket and snatched the long-coveted Philosopher's Stone. Roger was frantic but helpless. He had been summoned too hastily and had no magic-sensing potion. He had wanted to try the Cerberus form that wasn't fully tested yet, but his reserves were spent. He could only shift into a crow and weave between tongues of living flame. Voldemort had lost his earlier composure. With the stone in hand, he sought only a quick path to resurrection and would not gamble on more tricks. Massive magic poured through Quirrell's body. Voldemort's soul power surged. For a moment, Voldemort even released full control over Quirrell, producing the grotesque state of two souls in one body. Confusion flickered in Quirrell's eyes as he saw his own hand holding the wand and the stone. "Idiot! Recite the incantation. Build the bridge of resurrection." A shrill command screamed in his mind. "Yes, yes, master!" Quirrell answered in frantic obedience. As the fiend fire boxed in Roger's crow form, Voldemort's voice cried through the inferno, "Come, Roger, join eternity." Under that enormous infusion of magic, Quirrell's wand projected a beam greener and more focused than before, striking the exhausted Roger with deadly accuracy. At the same time, the writhing black shadow at the back of Quirrell's head, Voldemort's main fragment, shot out along the beam like an arrow, aimed straight for Roger's body. Inside Roger's consciousness, the biocomputer overclocked again. Another virtual soul shell blossomed in an instant. The emerald beam and Voldemort's shadow slammed into the simulated trap. "I am resurrected. I am finally Wait, what? What is With a wet, splattering sound, the black shadow failed to merge into Roger. It fell instead to the floor like a lump of viscous asphalt, a semi-solid, half-illusory shadow snake. "This is impossible! What is going on?" Voldemort's roar of shock and fury echoed into the blaze. No answer came. Having lost a proper host anchor, the fiend fire broke all bounds. The great fire serpent writhed free, expanding and twisting until the flames consumed everything, friend and foe alike. Roger endured the heat and dove for Quirrell, snatching the Philosopher's Stone away. It looked and felt like an ordinary pebble, cool to the touch, but the biocomputer's vision showed something else. The stone's magic was terrifyingly dense, like the lines of space itself bending into a void. There was no time for study. The fiend fire was taking the room over. Roger ordered the biocomputer to record everything it could about the stone, while he siphoned a torrent of its power to complete the Cerberus soul patterns. A violent surge of magic tore through him. His body expanded, bones cracking, fur erupting across his skin. In a heartbeat, he became a massive, hideous three-headed hound, infernal aura blazing, Cerberus, a mountain of a beast that filled nearly half the room. It had worked. The pattern logic was correct. Roger felt a manic surge of triumph, but the fiendfire's burning had reached his bones and marrow. That hellish fire could consume a soul. If he remained, he would be annihilated, magic resistance or not. He scooped the unconscious Harry into a giant claw and cradled him, then smashed through the roaring sea of fiendfire like a berserk tank, barreling toward the door. With a thunderous crash, the Cerberus burst out of the room, trailing smoke and embers. But the fiendfire was not spent. Like a caged beast unleashed, it chased them down the corridor with terrible speed. Scorching air whipped at the Cerberus's flanks. At that life-or-death moment, several figures appeared around a corner ahead. The leader wore the distinctive purple and gold robe patterned with stars, his white beard nearly reaching his chest. Behind half-moon spectacles, his blue eyes were razor-sharp. Albus Dumbledore had arrived. There was no relief on his face, only shock and deadly alertness. Seeing the monstrous, flame-wreathed creature and the fiend fire behind it, he did not hesitate. The Elder Wand was already raised, its tip leveled at the Cerberus. A powerful ripple of magic gathered instantly. 39. Horcrux. Dumbledore's face is as cold as ice. The tip of his raised wand gathers a heart-stopping light that looks ready to unleash some ruinous spell. Roger instantly reverses the transfiguration on the Cerberus, and, grabbing Harry, they tumble in a heap at everyone's feet. The moment he hits the floor, the blazing fiendfire seems to be crushed by an invisible giant hand. Thick, almost solid black smoke erupts from the heart of the flames. Those serpent eyes sweep over Dumbledore, and then every wisp of black smoke snaps back into Quirrell with a single hissing sound. In the next second, Quirrell's body warps with a grating noise, reshaping into the pale, flat, serpentine face of Lord Voldemort. Roger knows it's only an advanced transfiguration and won't last. Voldemort takes 2 elegant steps forward, scarlet pupils boring into Dumbledore's blue ones, his voice hoarse and cloyingly intimate. "My dear Professor, it has been so long." Dumbledore's expression is unreadable, his lips pressed tight. He says nothing. "I see my return surprises you?" Voldemort's triumph oozes from his serpentine face as he savors the silence. "I will kill you, Tom," Dumbledore says, low and unshakable. "There is always a way." "Ha ha ha!" Voldemort clutches his middle and rocks with shrill laughter. "Stop me? Kill me?" Dumbledore, still babbling the same deluded dreams. "Ha ha!" His laugh cuts off, his gaze colder than Arctic ice, and he lashes toward Roger on the ground. Besides, look, another Dark Lord rises. His grasp of soul magic leaves even the leader of the White Wizards far behind. He will touch eternity. And you? He inclines his head, venom in every syllable. "Can you kill them all?" "He is not like you." Dumbledore shakes his head firmly. "Ha! That is you, Dumbledore." Voldemort's face twists in disgust. "Forever presuming you control everything is just as you once watched me. Now you groom the next Dark Lord." He jabs a finger at Roger, voice rising into hysterical accusation. "Do you know him? He is far more terrible, far more dangerous than you imagine. He doesn't wallow in your fairy tales of love and courage. He digs for magic's coldest, truest power. He commands dozens of soul magics. The ultimate gate he seeks will shatter every order you built. Do you even grasp what that means? He will wield strength greater than any dark wizard, power beyond all others combined. Your chains will be useless. Make a living god wear your shackles? Ha!" Roger arches a brow. "Gentlemen, if you're going to chat, pretend I'm air, all right?" He fumes inwardly. These 2 star-crossed mentors can tear each other apart. Just leave him out. He only wants quiet research. Why does it sound like he's ending the world? Voldemort's venomous gaze snaps to Roger. "You think he forbids your dark arts for love? For courage? Don't be naive. People forgive others' sins, never their own." He sneers, honeyed malice coating every word. "He and I are the same. Both crave control. He's just craftier, wrapping his chains in candy-coated forgiveness and kindness. And you, Roger, what you pursue will shred his authority like parchment. Besides," his lips curl with cold certainty, "you despise every authority in your bones, don't you? Let me guess, you're already planning to slice me up for study, or loot the Ministry's sealed vault of forbidden archives, my dear student?" Roger rolls his eyes inside his head. Their mentor-pupil drama has nothing to do with him. Old Voldy betrayed his master, and now he slanders Roger. How low? Fine. If Voldemort wants underhanded, Roger will flip the table. He steps forward, impatience and provocation in his voice. "Think no one knows how you cling to life?" Voldemort freezes, then bursts into harsher laughter. Ridiculing a first-year who claims to know his secret, he laughs until Roger interrupts. "Isn't it just Horcruxes?" Roger's words ring down the silent corridor. Voldemort's grin petrifies as if struck by Petrificus totalis. His scarlet pupils narrow to slits of shock. Dumbledore's gaze snaps to Roger like lightning, sharp enough to strip him to the bone, filled with an intensity Roger has never seen before. "I grew up in the hidden wizarding world," Roger says, brown hair stirring though there is no wind, his black eyes bottomless. "I've seen soul magic and every sordid forbidden art. Your half-alive, formless state, Voldemort. What else but Horcruxes keeping you tethered?" The explanation is a half-truth, arranged precisely against Voldemort's earlier boasting about his mastery of soul magic. Voldemort's face contorts as if stripped bare. Shame and lethal peril claw at him. Understanding flickers in Dumbledore's eyes as scattered clues snap into a clearer picture. Roger isn't finished. He hurls a bigger bomb, openly hostile. Look at you, so frail. Must be more than one Horcrux. Let me guess, how many? Knowing you, several. 5, 6, 7, more. Voldemort snarls, wand slashing. Avada Kedavra. A searing green curse screams toward Roger. Watch out! Dumbledore moves without hesitation. He blurs between them, the Elder Wand carving a silver arc that bats the lethal light aside with a ringing clang. The curse slams into the far wall. Stone explodes outward. McGonagall, Snape, and the other professors have their wands up. Yet when they look, Voldemort is already a wisp of black smoke, vanished. Certain he has fled, the corridor collapses into suffocating silence. Every professor's gaze, shock, appraisal, indecipherable turmoil, fixes on Roger. Even the dust drifting in the air seems to have stopped. 40. Fake Philosopher's Stone. A strange stone gargoyle crouched at the entrance to the headmaster's office. Dumbledore smiled and said effortlessly, "Lemon drops," and the gargoyle leapt aside, revealing the spiral staircase beyond. He led Roger up, the walls on either side crowded with portraits of past headmasters. Beside the headmaster's desk sat a gilded perch, and perched upon it was a small red bird, Fawkes, Dumbledore's phoenix. As Dumbledore settled behind his desk, the portraits turned their painted eyes toward Roger in unison. "Who is this boy?" An old headmaster with a goatee grumbled. "Everard, were you asleep last term?" corrected the studious Quentin Trimble. He always took an interest in talented pupils. His book, Defense Against the Dark Arts, A Guide to Self-Protection from the Dark Forces, was still a set text for later years. "He's our standout this year, the boy who hit himself with a cruciatus and kept changing." "Oh, it's him!" cried Dilys Derwent, who had once been a dean at St. Mungo's Hospital, pressing her face to the frame in fascination. "He should be a Ravenclaw. Look at that research spirit. It seems he's cracked Crucio." "So skilled in the dark arts? I see a Slytherin in the making," said Elizabeth Burke, a Slytherin-born headmistress who spoke with obvious favoritism. "Perhaps even excellent pure-blood prospects," Phineas Nigellus Black muttered dourly, his portrait's expression all aristocratic disdain. Dumbledore paid the chatter no mind and smiled at Roger. "Don't worry about these old fogies," he said. "Their minds were frozen at whatever time sits inside their frames." He produced a box of sweets as though by magic and offered them. "Lemon drops?" Roger accepted, pocketing a lemon drop. Dumbledore's approval had grown noticeably over the past year. After watching him, especially since Roger had stood on the right side during the Philosopher's Stone affair, Dumbledore had come to see him as a true Hufflepuff, a blend of Ravenclaw's wit, Gryffindor's courage, and a hint of Slytherin drive, who nonetheless chose the Hufflepuff path of integrity. Looking at the boy, the headmaster felt some relief. Perhaps he had not erred this time, as he had with Tom Riddle. Roger took a lemon drop and placed it on his tongue. "Harry is still unconscious in the hospital wing," Dumbledore said lightly, popping a few cockroach clusters into his mouth. "Tell me what happened today." Roger's eyebrows rose. Was Dumbledore waiting for Harry to wake before questioning him? The headmaster's methods were subtle, an encouraging pressure that made you afraid to hide anything. Lord Voldemort wanted control too, but he demanded and branded. Dumbledore's control was gentler, almost comforting. Roger told the whole story without reserve. How he found Cerberus, how Harry had discovered the Philosopher's Stone and misjudged Snape, how Quirrell had taken Harry hostage in the chamber where the stone was hidden, how the battle unfolded. He explained the fiendfire that had overwhelmed Harry, his own transformations into Cerberus, and the substitute soul curse he'd used to escape. He admitted, too, that he had intended to keep the stone. At that point, Harry had already collapsed from the heat and fatigue. Only Quirrell and Voldemort had known the stone was in Roger's pocket, though who would believe them? In the original story, Voldemort had been present and had failed to sense the stone's power. Roger speculated Dumbledore might be equally unable to detect it now. After all, they'd come all the way up to the headmaster's office without Dumbledore remarking on it. Even if he discovered it later, years could pass. By then, Roger hoped he might be in a position to refuse any threat. The stone's nearly limitless magic was essential to his experiments and to sustaining the Cerberus form. The old wizard's magic sensing potion was finite. The stone meant infinite endurance, immense power, and a priceless subject for study. If he could unravel its secret, combine Voldemort's soul-splitting theory, his own virtual soul research, and the stone's energy, he could build an army of clones. Then no one, not Voldemort, not Dumbledore, would be able to intimidate him. Dumbledore listened with the same gentle smile. He showed no shock at Roger's confession that Voldemort had taken the stone. His face remained as composed as it had been on the staircase. It was only when Roger described the substitute soul curse that the headmaster's expression sharpened. "A very ingenious concept," he said quietly, "and it requires extremely high casting skill." After a long pause, Roger waited for the predictable questions about resurrection or the implications of Voldemort possessing the stone. Dumbledore, however, sat with his fingers laced on the desk, eyes narrowing as if considering something in the distance. Finally, Roger could not help himself. "Headmaster," he said, voice tight, "aren't you worried that Lord Voldemort will use the stone to return? What if he truly is resurrected?" Dumbledore's gaze snapped to him, bright and intense. Roger felt his heart drop. Had the headmaster seen through him? "Resurrection," Dumbledore said at last, "is not simple." His voice was calm, but carried a peculiar incisiveness, as though it could probe thoughts. "It requires certain conditions or a special time and place." He leaned forward, his blue eyes gleaming with that all-seeing light. "Besides," he added slowly, "how can you be so sure that what Lord Voldemort took was actually the Philosopher's Stone?" The words hit Roger like ice. His pupils constricted. A cold, sick feeling ran through him. Fake? But the magic thrumming in his pocket had been unmistakable, overwhelmingly real. How could the stone be a fake when its power had felt so vivid?